What if there was a figure whose mysterious existence bridged the gap between the divine and the human, yet whose story has remained largely untold for thousands of years? Melchizedek, the enigmatic king and priest, holds the key to profound spiritual mysteries that continue to captivate and challenge believers and scholars alike. The figure of Melchizedek appears suddenly and without explanation in the pages of the Bible, a mysterious figure whose background remains largely unknown. He is first mentioned in Genesis 14:18, where he meets Abraham after the latter's victorious battle against a coalition of kings. As Abraham returns from his victory, he encounters this enigmatic man who is described as both a king and a priest. In a world where such dual roles were rare, the combination of kingship and priesthood adds a layer of complexity to Melchizedek's identity, making his appearance all the more intriguing. Genesis gives us very little about his origins or lineage. He is introduced as the king of Salem and the priest of God Most High, yet no genealogical information is provided to explain his sudden appearance. There is no mention of his father, mother, or even the land from which he came. This omission raises questions. Who was Melchizedek, and how did he come to hold such a revered position? His absence from the genealogical records that define so many figures in the Old Testament only deepens the mystery. Unlike other biblical figures, whose family histories and divine appointments are well documented, Melchizedek's story begins abruptly, with no context or explanation, leaving much to speculation. The lack of detailed information about Melchizedek has led to various interpretations and theories over time. Some scholars have suggested that Melchizedek may have been a prefigurement of Christ, an archetype of the perfect priest and king whose role transcends time and earthly origins. Others have speculated that he was a real historical figure, perhaps a ruler of Jerusalem, before it became a significant city in the Israelite story. Still, others have pointed to the possibility that Melchizedek was a Canaanite priest-king, a figure who existed in the ancient world but has been obscured by the passage of time. Despite the silence surrounding his origins, one thing is clear: Melchizedek's appearance in the Bible carries profound theological significance. His interaction with Abraham, where he offers bread and wine and blesses the patriarch, marks a pivotal moment in the biblical narrative. This simple yet powerful exchange hints at a deeper connection between the divine and humanity, one that transcends the boundaries of time and lineage. For Christians, this moment becomes a prophetic foreshadowing of the Last Supper, where Christ would offer bread and wine as symbols of his body and blood. Melchizedek's sudden emergence in Genesis 14:18, with no clear background or context, leaves readers with more questions than answers. Yet, it is precisely this mystery that makes him one of the most fascinating figures in biblical history. His story is not just a tale of an ancient priest-king. It is a profound invitation to explore the deeper spiritual truths that underlie the biblical narrative, truths that continue to resonate across centuries. In the aftermath of Abraham's victory over the coalition of kings in Genesis 14, the Bible introduces Melchizedek in a moment of unexpected divine significance. Abraham, having just rescued his nephew Lot from captivity, encounters Melchizedek, the mysterious king of Salem, after returning from battle. The scene unfolds against the backdrop of a sprawling war where powerful kings had waged battle for control over cities, including Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham's victory over these kings, which resulted in the liberation of Lot, sets the stage for a pivotal meeting that intertwines the roles of king, priest, and patriarch in ways that few other biblical stories do. Melchizedek's sudden appearance as both king and priest in the midst of such a significant victory adds layers of mystery and divine order to the unfolding events. As king of Salem, which many scholars identify with Jerusalem, he stands as a figure of authority in a city that would later hold profound spiritual significance for Israel. His reign, however, is not marked by military conquest or territorial expansion, but by the unique dual role he holds. Melchizedek is not only a monarch but also a priest of God Most High, a title that emphasizes his connection to the divine and his authority in the spiritual realm. In offering Abraham bread and wine, Melchizedek's gesture is simple yet rich with symbolism. These humble gifts speak volumes. They foreshadow the Eucharist, the Last Supper of Christ, where bread and wine would be used to represent Christ's body and blood. This foreshadowing is part of what makes Melchizedek's appearance so significant, not merely as a king or priest, but as a figure whose very actions point to something far greater. His blessing of Abraham, coupled with his priestly role, signals a divine alignment between the patriarch of the Hebrew people and the higher spiritual truths that transcend the immediate political circumstances. Melchizedek's connection to Abraham in this context reveals a profound spiritual reality. Abraham, though victorious in battle, recognizes the higher authority that Melchizedek represents. Abraham, the father of the faith, receives the blessing of this mysterious priest-king and, in return, offers him a tenth of all the spoils of war. This act of tithing, paying homage to Melchizedek, highlights a spiritual acknowledgement that the victory was not solely his own but a result of divine intervention. The meeting between Abraham and Melchizedek is much more than a passing encounter. It serves as a significant turning point in biblical history. It signals that the divine realm often intersects with the earthly realm, even in the midst of earthly conflict. Melchizedek, the priest-king of Salem, occupies a unique place in the biblical narrative, offering a glimpse of the divine order that would come to define Jerusalem. His blessing of Abraham sets the stage for the unfolding covenant and for the priestly line that would later be established through the descendants of Levi. In this moment, ancient Sodom and the surrounding kingdoms fade into the backdrop, and the focus shifts to a higher spiritual realm, represented by Melchizedek's mysterious and sacred presence. Melchizedek's title, King of Salem, holds profound significance, especially when considering the meaning behind the name Salem itself. Derived from the Hebrew word shalom, meaning peace, Salem is often interpreted as a place of peace or wholeness. As the king of such a place, Melchizedek is not only a ruler in the conventional sense, but also a symbolic figure of peace in a world defined by conflict. His reign stands in stark contrast to the chaotic and violent period that surrounds him, a time when kingdoms fought for dominance and destruction seemed inevitable. The peace he embodies isn't merely political or territorial. It is a divine peace, a peace that transcends the immediate circumstances and speaks to a deeper, more spiritual realm. In a time when kings were often defined by their conquests and military prowess, Melchizedek's role as a king of peace was strikingly unusual. His kingdom of Salem, unlike the cities embroiled in war, appears to be a sanctuary of tranquility and divine order. The notion of peace in the biblical narrative often carries a spiritual dimension, symbolizing harmony with God and alignment with his divine will. Melchizedek's rule over Salem can thus be understood not as a mere political dominion, but as the establishment of a kingdom where divine peace reigns supreme. This peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of a higher order, a peace that guides and sustains those who seek righteousness and justice. Melchizedek's kingship becomes a direct counterpoint to the violent era in which he lived. While Abraham's victory in the Battle of Kings is defined by bloodshed and struggle, Melchizedek's appearance is marked by serenity and wisdom. In his encounter with Abraham, there is no mention of weapons or the spoils of war, only the symbolic offerings of bread and wine, the gifts of peace. These humble gifts, far from being mere sustenance, hold a deeper meaning. They represent the peace that surpasses understanding, an offering that transcends the violence of the world around them. The title King of Salem also carries implications for the broader biblical narrative, especially in its eventual connection to Jerusalem, a city that would come to symbolize peace and the dwelling place of God on earth. Jerusalem, in its later role as the spiritual center of Israel, echoes the kingdom of peace that Melchizedek once ruled. His role as both king and priest in this kingdom sets a precedent for the spiritual kingship that would later be fulfilled in Jesus Christ, who is referred to in the New Testament as the ultimate fulfillment of Melchizedek's priestly and kingly roles. Thus, Melchizedek's title, King of Salem, is not simply a designation of his earthly rule, but a profound expression of divine peace in the midst of chaos. It is a reminder that, even in the most tumultuous times, God's peace is available to those who seek it, transcending the violence and discord of the world. Melchizedek's role as a priest of the Most High God stands as one of the most intriguing aspects of his mysterious presence in the Bible. Unlike other figures in Scripture, who are carefully detailed with genealogies and family histories, Melchizedek's priesthood is marked by an absence of such records. His sudden appearance in Genesis 14:18, where he blesses Abraham and offers bread and wine, sets him apart as a figure whose priesthood is not tied to the established Levitical order. This absence of genealogy is not an oversight, but rather a deliberate narrative choice, one that carries profound theological significance. The lack of a recorded lineage for Melchizedek challenges conventional notions of priesthood, particularly in the context of the Israelite tradition, where the priesthood was strictly hereditary, passed down from father to son within the tribe of Levi. In Melchizedek's case, there is no mention of his ancestors, nor any indication of how he came to occupy such a lofty spiritual role. This omission has led many to speculate that his priesthood is of a different, more eternal kind, unbound by the constraints of time and lineage. His role as priest of the Most High God seems to exist outside of the human system of inheritance, suggesting that his priesthood is divinely ordained, beyond the reach of earthly traditions. Furthermore, Melchizedek's priesthood is not just a position of ritual and sacrifice, but a mediator between God and humanity. When he blesses Abraham, he acknowledges the greatness of God, whose power and authority transcend all earthly kingdoms. The priesthood of Melchizedek, as portrayed in Scripture, emphasizes a direct and unbroken connection with God, unmarred by human intervention or tradition. This priesthood is pure, untainted by the politics and power struggles that often taint earthly institutions. Melchizedek serves as a symbol of spiritual integrity, a reminder that true holiness comes not from lineage, but from a direct relationship with the divine. In the New Testament, the author of Hebrews draws a powerful connection between Melchizedek and Jesus Christ, comparing the two as figures who represent a priesthood of eternal significance. Hebrews 7:3 notes that Melchizedek's priesthood is without father, without mother, without genealogy, a description that echoes the eternal nature of Christ's priesthood, which does not rely on human descent or temporal authority. This parallel suggests that Melchizedek's priesthood is not just a historical anomaly, but a foreshadowing of the greater and more eternal priesthood that Jesus would fulfill. The mystery surrounding Melchizedek's lack of genealogy, then, becomes a theological statement in itself. His priesthood stands as a reminder that God's chosen ones are not always bound by human expectations or structures. The absence of a lineage speaks to the timelessness of Melchizedek's role, offering a glimpse of a divine order that transcends the limitations of history, reminding believers that God's plans are often greater than what can be understood or documented. Through this enigmatic priest, Scripture points to a deeper, more eternal truth, that true priesthood, and indeed true relationship with God, is not something that can be inherited, but must be directly ordained by the Creator himself. After Abraham's victorious return from rescuing his nephew Lot and defeating the kings who had captured him, he encountered Melchizedek, the mysterious king of Salem and priest of the Most High God. This moment, found in Genesis 14:18-20, is brief but loaded with spiritual and theological significance. As Abraham returned from battle, weary and laden with spoils, he was met by a figure unlike any other in the narrative of his journey, Melchizedek, who comes not to take but to offer. He brings with him bread and wine, a simple but profound gesture that transcends the immediate context of war and victory. The act of blessing Abraham was not just a customary gesture but a powerful declaration of divine favor. Melchizedek's blessing was more than a polite greeting. It recognized the hand of God in Abraham's triumph. "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth," he declares, placing Abraham in a position of spiritual honor. In the context of the time, where kings were seen as the ultimate authorities, this was a significant reversal. The king of Salem, a city with no recorded history, blesses Abraham, a man who had just triumphed over the kings of the East. The blessing signified God's acknowledgement of Abraham's faith and obedience, as well as a reaffirmation of the promise that Abraham would be the father of many nations. The offering of bread and wine also carries a deep symbolic weight. These elements, while simple, point to a communion that transcends the physical victory. Bread, a basic staple of life, and wine, often associated with joy and covenant, speak to the sustenance and divine provision that Abraham had received not only in the battle but in his journey of faith. The meal shared between them represents not just a gesture of hospitality but a form of spiritual nourishment that foreshadows the covenantal relationship between God and his chosen people. In this encounter, Abraham, the future father of the Israelite nation, receives the blessing of a priest whose priesthood is not tied to the laws or traditions of men. Melchizedek's blessing is an acknowledgement that Abraham's victories were not the result of military might alone, but of divine intervention. This brief but momentous meeting between the two figures also establishes the unique priesthood of Melchizedek as one that is eternal and separate from the Levitical priesthood, which would later be established under Moses. Melchizedek's blessing and the offering of bread and wine to Abraham go beyond mere hospitality or ceremonial duty. They point to a divine connection that transcends time and tradition. The priesthood of Melchizedek, not bound by genealogy, speaks of a relationship with God that is direct, pure, and eternal. In blessing Abraham, Melchizedek affirms that God's covenant with Abraham is not just for his descendants but for all who seek to walk in faith. This encounter marks the beginning of a relationship that, through the ages, would carry profound implications for the unfolding story of God's redemptive plan. When Abraham met Melchizedek, he was not only blessed by the enigmatic king and priest of Salem but also offered a tenth of all the spoils of his victory. This act, recorded in Genesis 14:20, is as profound as it is simple. Abraham, the patriarch of the Israelites, and a man who had just triumphed over a coalition of kings, willingly gave Melchizedek a tithe, a tenth of the riches he had gained. The offering was not only a gesture of respect but an act of reverence and acknowledgement of Melchizedek's higher spiritual authority. The act of giving a tenth was not merely a customary gesture, but one that carried deep theological significance. In a time when kings were often seen as conquerors and rulers of vast territories, Abraham's submission of the tithe to Melchizedek signified his recognition of God's sovereignty over all things, including the fruits of his victory. This was no mere transaction of material wealth. It was a spiritual act that demonstrated Abraham's acknowledgement that his success had come not from his own strength, but from the Most High God. By offering a tenth, Abraham symbolically surrendered a portion of what he had gained back to God, acknowledging that all he had was, in truth, a gift from God. This act of submission also sets a precedent for future generations, establishing the principle of tithing as an expression of reverence and recognition of God's role in the lives of his people. Though the practice of tithing would later be codified in the law of Moses for the Israelites, this early example in Abraham's life shows that the principle transcends any specific law or rule. It was an intrinsic act of worship, a way of expressing gratitude and devotion to the Creator long before the formalization of religious rituals. The tithe, in this instance, becomes not only a physical offering but a spiritual one, a recognition that no matter how much one possesses, it is God who provides. Moreover, Abraham's act of giving to Melchizedek highlights the role of the priesthood in mediating between God and humanity. Melchizedek's priesthood was not bound by the laws of Israel or the Levitical system. It was an eternal priesthood, one that stood in contrast to the temporary and limited roles of the later priests. By submitting a tithe to Melchizedek, Abraham recognized that the priesthood of Melchizedek had a divine origin, one that reached beyond the physical realm into the spiritual. In this small but significant act, the concept of tithe serves as a reminder of the need for submission, reverence, and gratitude toward the divine. It marks the beginning of a tradition that not only symbolizes physical offerings, but also points to a deeper spiritual truth that everything we have, everything we accomplish, is ultimately a gift from God. Melchizedek's blessing of Abraham, as recorded in Genesis 14:19, holds profound theological significance that extends far beyond the moment itself. When Melchizedek declared, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth," he not only bestowed a blessing upon Abraham but also reaffirmed the divine covenant that would define the future of Abraham's descendants. This blessing is not just a personal or ceremonial gesture. It carries with it the weight of divine approval and the confirmation of God's purpose in Abraham's life. In this moment, Melchizedek's blessing connects directly to God's covenant with Abraham, which would later become the foundation of Israel's identity and purpose. God had promised Abraham that his descendants would become a great nation, one that would be a blessing to all the nations of the earth. Genesis 12:2-3. Melchizedek, as the priest of God Most High, acknowledges this divine plan and speaks a prophetic word over Abraham. By invoking the name of God Most High, Melchizedek recognizes the divine hand behind Abraham's victory and the larger work God was doing through him. This blessing serves as both a spiritual and a theological affirmation of the covenant that God had already established with Abraham. It marks the moment when Abraham's role as the father of many nations is recognized not just by God, but by one who serves as a high priest in a time before the Levitical priesthood was established. The act of blessing here is not a random or incidental act. It is a declaration of God's favor upon Abraham and his future. It reinforces that Abraham's journey was one under divine guidance, a journey that was destined to have cosmic significance. Theologically, Melchizedek's blessing also foreshadows the broader theme of priesthood in biblical narrative. Melchizedek, the priest of God Most High, stands in stark contrast to the later Levitical priesthood. His blessing of Abraham serves as a reminder that God's plan for redemption would not be confined to any one group or nation but would reach out to all people. The blessing is a statement of universal blessing, not limited to Israel, but extending to the nations through Abraham's descendants. In the larger scope of the biblical narrative, this moment signifies that God's covenant with Abraham was divinely ordained and will unfold in ways beyond human comprehension. It also highlights that Melchizedek's priesthood is not simply an isolated event, but a precursor to the ultimate priesthood of Christ, who would later fulfill the covenant in a way that Melchizedek's blessing only hinted at. Through this moment of blessing, we see the unfolding of God's eternal plan, a plan that, like Melchizedek's priesthood, stands beyond time and human understanding, yet remains intricately tied to the lives and destinies of those like Abraham who are chosen to carry it forward. The uniqueness of Melchizedek stands as one of the most intriguing aspects of his story in the Bible. While many figures in the biblical narrative come with detailed genealogies or family histories, Melchizedek appears without such records. This absence of genealogy is not an oversight, but a deliberate feature that invites profound theological reflection. In Genesis, we are told that Melchizedek was the king of Salem and a priest of God Most High, yet no mention is made of his parents, his lineage, or his death. This stark contrast with the typical biblical pattern of familial records suggests that Melchizedek's role in the story of salvation transcends ordinary human understanding. The lack of genealogy invites speculation and fosters a deeper theological exploration of Melchizedek's identity. In the letter to the Hebrews, the writer reflects on this absence, stating that Melchizedek's priesthood is without father, mother, or genealogy. Hebrews 7:3. This has led some scholars and theologians to suggest that Melchizedek's lack of recorded ancestry and his unexplained appearance may symbolize an eternal, otherworldly nature. The absence of a beginning or end to his life in the biblical text hints at a figure who is not bound by the limitations of time, much like the eternal nature of Christ's priesthood, which Melchizedek's is often seen as a precursor to. In considering Melchizedek's eternal nature, The idea that he may represent an immortal being, or perhaps even a Christophany, an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament, gains traction. Some theologians have suggested that Melchizedek was not merely a man, but a heavenly being sent by God to fulfill a specific role in the divine narrative. His mysterious and sudden appearance in the biblical text, combined with his authoritative position as both king and priest, points to a figure that is greater than ordinary humanity. This idea is particularly compelling when we consider the connection between Melchizedek and Christ, as the New Testament directly compares the two in terms of priesthood. The possibility of Melchizedek's eternal nature is also suggested by his role as a priest. While the Levitical priesthood is clearly established with defined genealogies, Melchizedek's priesthood is unrooted in human lineage. This could indicate that his priesthood is not of this world, reflecting a divine or eternal origin. His appearance as a priest of God Most High, without the usual constraints of earthly life, makes him an enigmatic figure who seems to bridge the gap between the divine and human realms. Ultimately, Melchizedek remains an enduring mystery, his nature and purpose a subject of much debate and speculation. His absence of genealogy, his seemingly eternal existence, and his priestly role all point to a figure that transcends the usual limits of human history, inviting us to consider a deeper connection to the divine order. In many ways, his story serves as a reminder of the profound mystery that surrounds God's work in the world, one that often defies human comprehension and invites awe and reverence. The Melchizedekian priesthood stands in stark contrast to the Levitical priesthood, both in its origin and its lasting significance. While the Levitical priesthood was established through the descendants of Aaron, a clear line of succession traced back to the tribe of Levi, the priesthood of Melchizedek appears without such genealogical ties, making it a unique anomaly in the religious history of the Bible. In the book of Genesis, Melchizedek is described simply as the king of Salem and a priest of God Most High, with no mention of any ancestry, temple rituals, or specific religious practices. His priesthood, unanchored by human lineage or traditions, serves as a mysterious precursor to the priesthood of Christ. The Levitical priesthood was foundational to the covenantal system that governed Israel. The priests were chosen from among the Levites and were responsible for offering sacrifices, maintaining the tabernacle, and performing rituals to atone for the sins of the people. Their lineage, carefully recorded and preserved, ensured a continuous line of priests who were held accountable for the religious well-being of the nation. In contrast, Melchizedek's priesthood was not tied to any family line, nor did it require sacrifices or the establishment of a temple. He simply appeared, offering bread and wine to Abraham and blessing him in the name of God Most High. The very simplicity of this act of blessing points to a higher and more universal priesthood, one that transcends the boundaries of Israel and foreshadows the priesthood of Christ. The uniqueness of Melchizedek's priesthood becomes even more pronounced when considered in light of its comparison to the Levitical priesthood, especially as described in the New Testament. In Hebrews, the writer highlights the superior nature of Melchizedek's priesthood, explaining that it was without beginning or end, and thus eternal, unlike the Levitical priests, who were bound by the law, and whose service was temporary. Melchizedek's priesthood was of a different order, one that was not dependent on human genealogy or the rituals of sacrifice. The Melchizedekian priesthood points to an eternal, unchangeable covenant that reflects the eternal priesthood of Christ, who, as the New Testament emphasizes, is a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. What makes Melchizedek's priesthood so enigmatic is the lack of any further explanation. There is no elaborate description of his duties, no institution of a religious order, and no continuation of his priestly line. Yet his brief appearance in the Bible reverberates through the centuries, with theologians and scholars continuing to grapple with the implications of his role. His mysterious position in religious history serves as a reminder that some truths transcend the limitations of earthly institutions. In a world bound by rules, rituals, and genealogies, Melchizedek stands as a symbol of a divine order that exists beyond these constraints. pointing ultimately to the eternal and unshakable priesthood of Christ. The reference to Melchizedek in Psalm 110:4 is one of the most profound and significant allusions in the Hebrew Scriptures, offering a glimpse into the enduring nature of his priesthood. The psalm, attributed to King David, speaks of a future, divinely appointed king who would rule with power and justice. It is here that the line, "You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek," is delivered, linking the Messianic king to Melchizedek's priesthood in a manner that elevates it beyond the earthly and temporal. In this short phrase, Psalm 110:4 is not merely referring to an isolated individual, but is enshrining an eternal truth about the priesthood that transcends human history. The psalmist's reference to Melchizedek is striking in that it highlights the eternal nature of this priesthood. Unlike the Levitical priesthood, which was subject to succession and the passing of generations, the priesthood of Melchizedek is portrayed as eternal. This priesthood is not bound by lineage, nor is it linked to a temple, sacrifices, or a specific cultural or religious context. Melchizedek's unique priesthood serves as a bridge to a greater, eternal priesthood, one that is realized fully in the person of Jesus Christ. In the psalm, God declares that the coming Messiah will operate within this same order, emphasizing a priesthood that is not limited by the constraints of time or the decay of human institutions. This declaration elevates Melchizedek's priesthood from an obscure figure in the Genesis narrative to a profound, theological symbol. His priesthood, free from the limitations of human lineage, is now cast as a divine institution, unchanging and everlasting. Psalm 110:4 is not just a reflection of Melchizedek's greatness, but also a foreshadowing of the role Christ would fulfill. The reference elevates Melchizedek's priesthood beyond the temporal, indicating that his priestly office points to something far greater, a high priest who would intercede eternally on behalf of humanity. The reference in Psalm 110:4 serves as a linchpin in Christian theology, connecting the priesthood of Melchizedek with Christ's eternal priesthood. In the New Testament, particularly in the book of Hebrews, this connection is made explicit. Hebrews 7:17 quotes Psalm 110:4 to demonstrate that Jesus is the fulfillment of the prophecy, the ultimate high priest in the order of Melchizedek. This establishes the continuity between the ancient, mysterious priesthood of Melchizedek and the new covenant brought about by Christ, highlighting the eternal nature of the divine plan for redemption. In this way, Melchizedek's role in Psalm 110:4 resonates far beyond his brief appearance in Genesis. It transforms his priesthood from an ancient, enigmatic figure into an eternal, divine archetype, one that would find its fulfillment in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In Jewish thought, Melchizedek occupies a unique and somewhat mysterious place, with interpretations of his figure stretching across the wide expanse of Jewish literature and midrash. His brief appearance in Genesis has prompted a variety of reflections, none more profound than the way in which he is viewed as a prototype of the ideal priest, an archetype that transcends the conventional understanding of priesthood found in later Jewish traditions. In midrashic literature, Melchizedek is often seen as a symbol of spiritual purity and divine service. While the Levitical priesthood would later dominate the religious life of Israel, Melchizedek's priesthood, which predates it by many generations, is viewed as a more direct and pure form of worship. The midrashic writings highlight his connection to God Most High, portraying him as a righteous and pious man who performed his priestly duties in a manner that was unfettered by the limitations of the Jewish sacrificial system. This understanding of Melchizedek underscores the idea of a priesthood rooted not in ritual sacrifices or temple offerings, but in a direct and intimate relationship with God. Jewish thought, particularly in the early rabbinic period, emphasized Melchizedek's role as an ideal priest who performed his duties with a level of perfection not attainable by those who followed in his footsteps. Some rabbinic texts even suggest that Melchizedek was not merely a priest, but a king who embodied the perfect union of royal authority and spiritual leadership, a figure whose example would resonate throughout Jewish history. In this respect, Melchizedek's priesthood becomes a model of how spiritual leadership should be exercised, without the complications of earthly desires or corruptible institutions. In later Jewish mystical traditions, such as Kabbalah, Melchizedek's image continues to evolve. He is sometimes depicted as an eternal figure, a man who transcended the limitations of the earthly realm to become a figure of cosmic significance. His priesthood is understood not as a temporary institution but as part of the divine order that exists beyond time. Melchizedek is often linked to the idea of the perfect priest, who is able to mediate between the divine and the earthly realms in a way that goes beyond mere ritual. In this framework, he becomes a type of intermediary who stands as a symbol of the ideal spiritual state to which all priests and worshippers should aspire. The enigmatic nature of Melchizedek in Jewish thought is not limited to his absence of genealogy or his mysterious role in Genesis. It is found in the way he represents an ideal that Jewish traditions repeatedly return to, looking back to him as a model of the purest priesthood. In the silence around his origins, Jewish thought finds a space to reflect on the deeper spiritual truths of priesthood, that it is not rooted in lineage or ritual alone, but in righteousness, service to God, and the pursuit of spiritual perfection. For the Jewish mind, Melchizedek's figure encapsulates the unspoken potential of what the priesthood could be, an eternal symbol of holiness and divine connection. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the mid-20th century revealed many hidden gems of ancient Jewish thought, offering unprecedented insight into the religious and spiritual ideas circulating in Judea during the Second Temple period. Among these scrolls, the figure of Melchizedek stands out in unexpected ways, sparking speculation and offering a deeper understanding of his mysterious role in religious thought. The Melchizedek scroll, in particular, sheds light on his significance, connecting him to themes of judgment, salvation, and the cosmic struggle between light and darkness. The scrolls, found in Qumran caves, include texts that reference Melchizedek in a way that suggests his elevated status within certain Jewish communities. Far from being a mere shadowy figure in Genesis, he emerges in the scrolls as a more prominent, almost messianic figure. In the context of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Melchizedek is portrayed as an agent of divine judgment, one who is tasked with carrying out God's will in the final days. This portrayal aligns with the apocalyptic themes that permeate much of the literature found among the scrolls, where figures like Melchizedek often take on roles of cosmic significance, delivering divine retribution or ushering in salvation for the faithful. The Melchizedek scroll offers a particularly striking vision of his role in the end times. According to the text, Melchizedek is not only a priest and king, but also a figure of judgment who will play a pivotal role in the final confrontation between the forces of good and evil. He is depicted as the one who will free the captives, bringing salvation to the righteous while executing judgment on the wicked. This echoes the eschatological visions present in many Jewish apocalyptic writings, where figures like Melchizedek are seen as active participants in the unfolding of God's final plan for humanity. What is particularly fascinating is the spiritual themes tied to Melchizedek in the Dead Sea Scrolls. His priesthood is depicted as part of a divine order that transcends the earthly priesthoods of the Levitical order. This connection suggests that Melchizedek's priesthood was seen as perfect, eternal, and untainted by the flaws of human institutions. His role as both priest and king reinforces his authority in the spiritual realm, aligning him with divine power in ways that place him apart from ordinary human kings and priests. In this light, Melchizedek becomes not only a figure of judgment but also a symbol of divine order and salvation, a spiritual intermediary who holds the key to the restoration of purity and justice in the world. The revelations in the Dead Sea Scrolls highlight Melchizedek's ongoing relevance within Jewish thought, especially in the apocalyptic context. His figure is not static but evolves, becoming an archetype for the divine agent who will restore cosmic balance. The scrolls transform his earlier, enigmatic portrayal into a more active and dynamic role, making him a central figure in the eschatological hopes of the community that produced these writings. Through these texts, Melchizedek emerges not just as a shadowy priest-king from Genesis, but as a powerful spiritual being whose role extends far beyond his first appearance. Melchizedek's brief but significant encounter with Abraham in Genesis sets him apart from other figures of the patriarchal age. While Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob form the core of the ancestral narrative that shapes the foundations of Israel, Melchizedek exists in the background as a mysterious figure whose influence subtly echoes throughout the patriarchal story. His appearance before Abraham comes at a crucial moment, after Abraham's victory over the kings who had taken Lot captive. In this light, Melchizedek's presence is not just as a king and priest, but as a spiritual guide, offering Abraham a blessing that connects him to a higher divine order. Though Melchizedek does not have a direct genealogical link to the patriarchs, his connection to them is more profound in the spiritual sense. He transcends the bloodlines of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, making him a unique figure who stands apart from the unfolding lineage of Israel. His priesthood, untethered by genealogy, emphasizes the idea that divine favor and authority can be given to individuals outside the established family structures. Melchizedek's role here is not merely one of external interaction, but a reminder that God's providence is not confined to the bloodline of the patriarchs, but can extend far beyond, intertwining the fates of those who serve him in different ways. While the patriarchs of Genesis are often depicted in the context of establishing and expanding God's covenant with their descendants, Melchizedek's interaction with Abraham speaks to a larger, more universal spiritual reality. His blessing of Abraham, along with the offering of bread and wine, symbolizes a deeper connection to God that is not reliant on rituals or sacrifices, but on a more direct, almost mystical, communion with the divine. In the midst of Abraham's journey and the beginning of his covenant with God, Melchizedek serves as a quiet reminder that divine authority is not bound by earthly systems of power. His blessing is a moment of recognition for Abraham that God's purposes are unfolding not just within the family of Abraham but throughout the broader world. For Isaac and Jacob, Melchizedek does not appear directly, but his presence lingers as a prototype of the kind of spiritual authority that they themselves would encounter in different forms. Isaac's life is marked by a strong sense of God's covenant promise, a legacy that traces directly back to the spiritual bond Abraham shares with Melchizedek. Jacob, whose name would later be changed to Israel, inherits the same covenant promise, one that begins with the blessing of Melchizedek over Abraham and extends through the generations. While Melchizedek is not part of the direct narrative of Isaac and Jacob, his legacy is imprinted on the patriarchal story as an unseen force, reminding the patriarchs and their descendants that the fulfillment of God's promises stretches beyond familial ties, extending to those who walk in the ways of God. Thus, Melchizedek's role in the age of the patriarchs is one of quiet significance, a divine touchstone marking the intersections between the known world of Abraham's descendants and the broader, unbounded realm of God's eternal purposes. His appearance in Genesis is a rare, fleeting moment in the patriarchal narrative, but his spiritual influence is lasting, transcending the generations and echoing into the covenantal promises that would define Israel's destiny. The figure of Melchizedek has long been a subject of Messianic interpretation, especially within Christian theology, where he is seen as a type or foreshadowing of the coming Messiah. His priesthood, unique and unending, draws a direct connection to the promise of a future high priest who would come in the same eternal order, a figure who would not be bound by the limitations of earthly priesthoods. The Messiah, in these readings, is seen not only as a spiritual leader, but as one who would carry forward the divine role established by Melchizedek, transcending the old ways of sacrifice and ritual to bring about a deeper, everlasting relationship between God and humanity. In Psalm 110:4, the connection between Melchizedek and the Messiah is explicitly made, with the declaration, "You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek." This passage, which is referenced in the New Testament book of Hebrews, establishes Melchizedek as a precursor to the Messiah's priesthood. Unlike the Levitical priests, who were bound by lineage and whose service ended with death. Melchizedek's priesthood was eternal, an unbroken line that pointed forward to a priesthood that would be permanent and divine in nature. The Messiah, in this light, is understood to fulfill this role, not as a mere descendant of Levi, but as one who embodies the ideal priesthood established by Melchizedek, one that is not limited by death, genealogy, or temporal authority. The Messianic reading of Melchizedek's priesthood emphasizes the eternal nature of God's plan for salvation. Just as Melchizedek's appearance was unexpected and without a clear human lineage, the Messiah's arrival, too, would break the conventional understanding of kingship and priesthood. This future high priest, who would come from the line of David, would also, in a mystical sense, be aligned with Melchizedek's order. His sacrifice, unlike those of the Levitical priests who offered animals, would be an ultimate and once-for-all act, fulfilling the deepest longings of both priesthood and kingship. For Christians, the connection between Melchizedek and Jesus Christ becomes a powerful theological point. Jesus, like Melchizedek, is not only a priest but also a king, ruling over an eternal kingdom of peace. Hebrews 7 delves into this, affirming that Jesus is a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, linking his eternal priesthood to that of the mysterious figure from Genesis. The symbolism of bread and wine in Melchizedek's offering to Abraham also resonates with the Eucharistic themes of Christ's body and blood, underscoring the messianic fulfillment of Melchizedek's role as both priest and provider. Thus, Melchizedek's appearance in the Bible serves as more than a historical curiosity. It acts as a theological seed, planted deep within the narrative of Scripture, which would later blossom into the revelation of a Messiah who would bridge the gap between humanity and God in a way no priest or king before him could. His priesthood, eternal and unchanging, sets the stage for the Messiah's redemptive work, a work that fulfills and perfects the divine promises first hinted at in Melchizedek's mysterious and blessed encounter with Abraham. In Jewish apocalyptic literature, Melchizedek's enigmatic role deepens, especially in texts like the Book of Enoch. These writings expand on his mystery, portraying him as not just a priest and king but as a pivotal figure in the cosmic struggle between good and evil. In this tradition, Melchizedek transcends his role as a solitary, priestly figure from Genesis, taking on a more prominent, almost celestial role in the judgment and restoration of the world. In the Book of Enoch, Melchizedek is depicted as an exalted priest and king who is intricately linked to divine judgment. His role in these apocalyptic writings positions him as a high-ranking agent of divine will, one who will be instrumental in the final judgment that restores order to the world. His association with justice and the restoration of divine order highlights the dual aspects of his character. Not only does he bless and mediate on behalf of humanity, but he also holds the authority to execute divine judgment in the end times. The Book of Enoch even suggests that Melchizedek, who had no earthly father or mother, is a prefiguring figure of a future messianic role. In this sense, his priesthood is portrayed as eternal and integral to the restoration of the world after the corruption brought about by the fallen angels, the Nephilim, and the ensuing chaos. This apocalyptic version of Melchizedek is closely associated with the final judgment, which will ultimately cleanse the earth of the corruption instigated by these fallen beings. The apocalyptic texts speak of Melchizedek's role as one of purification, holding the authority to separate the righteous from the wicked. His appearance in the final days signals the triumph of divine righteousness over the forces of evil. The restoration that Melchizedek's priesthood symbolizes is not just the purification of Israel, but the cosmic restoration of all creation and order that had been distorted by human and angelic transgression. The concept of Melchizedek in these texts is not merely that of a historical figure, but rather a symbol of hope and divine action in a time of great chaos. His role as an eternal priest and a figure of judgment encapsulates the yearning for a world restored to its original, untainted state. The apocalyptic portrayal of Melchizedek in the Book of Enoch, along with other Jewish writings, underscores a broader theme in Jewish eschatology. The world will be renewed and the injustices of the past will be rectified through divine intervention. As such, Melchizedek becomes not just a representative of spiritual purity, but a cosmic force involved in the ultimate restoration of divine order. These texts are crucial in understanding the multifaceted nature of Melchizedek's significance, particularly within Jewish apocalyptic thought. They elevate him from a shadowy figure in the Genesis narrative to a cosmic agent of divine justice and restoration. In the eschatological worldview of these writings, Melchizedek's priesthood transcends time, reaching its apex in the final days, when his judgment will help cleanse and renew the earth, ensuring that divine will is fully realized. In the New Testament, Melchizedek's presence takes on new significance, particularly in the book of Hebrews. His brief mention in Genesis is expanded upon, providing profound theological implications that link him directly to the figure of Jesus Christ. The writer of Hebrews introduces Melchizedek as a type, or foreshadowing, of Christ's eternal priesthood, bridging the Old and New Covenants with remarkable depth. In Hebrews 7, the author draws a stark contrast between Melchizedek's priesthood and the Levitical priesthood, which was bound by law and lineage. Melchizedek, as an enigmatic figure who appeared without genealogical record, represents a superior, eternal order that transcends human limitations. This timeless priesthood points directly to Christ, whose priesthood, as depicted in Hebrews, is also eternal and unchanging. The connection between Jesus Christ and Melchizedek is pivotal in Christian theology, as it underscores the uniqueness of Christ's sacrificial role. The passage in Hebrews 7:3 states that Melchizedek is without father, without mother, without genealogy, symbolizing an eternal priesthood. This echoes Christ's own priesthood, which, unlike the Levitical priests, is not based on descent or temporary duties, but on the eternal nature of his being. Jesus, as the high priest in the order of Melchizedek, offers a perfect sacrifice once and for all, making the sacrificial system of the Old Testament obsolete. Where the Levitical priests had to offer daily sacrifices for sins, Christ's priesthood, established in the likeness of Melchizedek, is perfected in his one-time offering of himself on the cross. The writer of Hebrews elevates Melchizedek's mysterious priesthood to a divine symbol, showing that Jesus, like Melchizedek, holds the dual role of both king and priest, offering peace and reconciliation with God. Jesus' fulfillment of this priesthood suggests that the Old Testament laws and rituals were merely a shadow of the heavenly reality that was to come. Melchizedek's appearance as both a king and priest foreshadows the ultimate unity of these roles in Christ. Jesus, in his sacrifice and role as high priest, surpasses all earthly institutions, offering believers a relationship with God that is based on grace rather than ritual. The connection between Christ and Melchizedek serves to reinforce the New Covenant's superiority. Just as Melchizedek was a figure of peace and blessing in his day, Jesus fulfills that role in a far deeper, eternal sense. The priesthood of Christ, rooted in the order of Melchizedek, offers not only access to the throne of grace but also a new and living way for all who believe. Through Christ, believers are brought into a restored relationship with God, with Melchizedek's priesthood serving as a divine precursor to the salvation that is now realized in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In Hebrews 7, Jesus is portrayed as a priest in the order of Melchizedek, a designation that carries profound theological significance. The writer of Hebrews carefully constructs a parallel between Jesus and Melchizedek, emphasizing the eternal nature of both priesthoods. Unlike the Levitical priesthood, which was temporary and based on descent, Melchizedek's priesthood is eternal and unchanging. The same is true for Jesus, whose priesthood is not defined by lineage or by any human law but by the divine will of God. Hebrews highlights the uniqueness of Melchizedek's priesthood by stating that he was without father or mother, a description that symbolically points to Christ's eternal nature. Jesus' priesthood, much like Melchizedek's, transcends earthly boundaries and is not tied to the fleeting and flawed systems of human religion. The comparison between Melchizedek and Jesus also underscores the superiority of Christ's role as a mediator between God and humanity. Melchizedek is introduced as a figure who brought both blessing and bread and wine to Abraham, signifying peace and sustenance. Similarly, Jesus, in his priestly role, offers peace through his body and blood. His sacrifice on the cross, like the offerings Melchizedek made to Abraham, is an act of blessing and reconciliation. But unlike the temporary and repeated sacrifices of the Levitical priests, Christ's sacrifice is once for all. Jesus, as the eternal priest in the order of Melchizedek, has secured an eternal redemption for all who come to God through him. The sacrifices of the Levitical priests could never fully cleanse sin, but Jesus, as the perfect high priest, offers himself as the ultimate and unblemished offering, securing eternal salvation for humanity. In this comparison, the writer of Hebrews stresses that Jesus is not simply a priest but a priest-king, just as Melchizedek was both the king of Salem and a priest of the Most High God. This dual role of priest and king highlights the authority and completeness of Jesus' work. Whereas the Levitical priesthood was confined to a certain tribe and its reign limited to earthly kings, Jesus is both the eternal priest and the sovereign king. His priesthood has no end, and his reign is not confined to any earthly domain. Jesus, in the order of Melchizedek, is able to mediate between heaven and earth, offering access to God and ushering in God's kingdom. By identifying Jesus with Melchizedek, Hebrews not only emphasizes the eternal and superior nature of his priesthood, but also connects Jesus' work with the divine plan of redemption set in motion long before his earthly ministry. Through this priesthood, Jesus makes a new and living way for humanity to be reconciled to God, fulfilling the purpose of the Old Testament priesthood but transcending its limitations. Melchizedek's role in early Christian doctrine became a cornerstone in the development of Christian theology, particularly regarding the priesthood and the concept of eternal life. Early church fathers, such as Augustine, Jerome, and Origen, delved into the enigmatic figure of Melchizedek, using him as a symbol to illuminate the nature of Christ's priesthood and his divine mission. For these early theologians, Melchizedek's mysterious appearance in the Scriptures, without a genealogy, and with his dual role as both priest and king, made him a powerful type of Christ. They saw in Melchizedek not just an Old Testament figure, but a prophetic precursor of Jesus Christ, whose priesthood transcended earthly limitations and pointed to the eternal and heavenly priesthood that Jesus would establish. In the writings of the Church Fathers, the key theological significance of Melchizedek was his priesthood, which stood in stark contrast to the Levitical priesthood of the Old Testament. Unlike the Levitical priests, who were bound by lineage and who performed sacrifices that were repeated and incomplete, Melchizedek's priesthood was described as eternal and superior. His blessing of Abraham, unconnected to any formal sacrificial system, signified a deeper spiritual offering, one that foreshadowed the ultimate sacrifice that would be made by Christ. Early Christian thinkers, drawing from the book of Hebrews, emphasized that Melchizedek's priesthood, unlike the temporary and flawed human priesthoods that followed, was based on an eternal and unchanging order. Jesus, as the fulfillment of this priesthood, brought a final, all-sufficient sacrifice for sin. The Fathers made clear that Melchizedek's priesthood was not based on any inherited authority, but rather on the direct will of God, and so too was Christ's. The concept of eternal life, another central tenet of Christian thought, was also explored through Melchizedek's example. For early Christians, the eternal nature of Christ's priesthood was tied to his role as the giver of eternal life to those who believed. In their interpretation, Melchizedek's reign as king of Salem, the city of peace, was understood as a foreshadowing of the peace that Christ would bring to those reconciled to God through his eternal priesthood. This peace, for the Fathers, was not merely temporal or political, as it had been for Melchizedek, but spiritual and eternal, bringing not just earthly prosperity, but the gift of eternal life. The blessing of Melchizedek, through bread and wine, was viewed as a precursor to the Eucharist, where Christians partake of the body and blood of Christ, receiving a foretaste of eternal life in him. As Christian doctrine matured, especially through the work of the Church Fathers, the role of Melchizedek was deeply woven into the fabric of early Christian teachings about priesthood, salvation, and eternal life. His figure served as a bridge between the Old Testament anticipation and the New Testament fulfillment in Christ, showing that the priesthood of Jesus was not a new invention, but the culmination of a divine plan that had been unfolding since the earliest pages of Scripture. Melchizedek has long been seen as a profound type of Christ in Christian thought, with his life and role in the Old Testament foreshadowing the coming of Jesus in remarkable ways. Early Christian writers and theologians, drawing from both the Hebrew Scriptures and the New Testament, identified Melchizedek's priesthood as a symbol of the eternal and all-sufficient priesthood of Christ. In this light, Melchizedek's appearance in Genesis 14 was not a random event but part of a divine design that pointed toward the greater and eternal work of salvation that Christ would fulfill. One of the most significant ways Melchizedek foreshadows Christ is in his priesthood. Melchizedek was both a king and a priest, a dual role that was not common in the ancient world. His priesthood was not based on lineage or a system of sacrifices like the Levitical priesthood, but was instead eternal and without end. This characteristic was highlighted in the book of Hebrews, which emphasizes that Jesus' priesthood is in the order of Melchizedek, and thus eternal, unlike the temporary and flawed nature of the Levitical priesthood. The priesthood of Christ, like Melchizedek's, is unbroken and permanent, bridging humanity to God in an unchanging and eternal covenant. Another key theological point that connects Melchizedek to Christ is the blessing he bestowed upon Abraham, which was an act of peace and divine favor. When Melchizedek, the king of Salem, met Abraham, he offered him bread and wine, signifying nourishment, peace, and blessing. This moment points forward to the Last Supper, where Jesus, the ultimate priest, would offer his body and blood as the true nourishment for eternal life. The meal that Melchizedek shared with Abraham was a symbolic act of blessing, but Christ's sacrament would become the fulfillment of that act, offering not just temporary blessings but eternal salvation through his sacrifice. The universal blessing that Melchizedek pronounced over Abraham also finds its fulfillment in Christ. The blessing, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High," signifies not just a personal or national promise but a universal one that would extend to all nations. Jesus, through his work on the cross, brought this universal blessing into fruition, making salvation available to all people, irrespective of their heritage or background. Just as Melchizedek was a priest for all, Christ, through his death and resurrection, became the high priest for all of humanity, offering access to God through his perfect and eternal priesthood. In these ways, Melchizedek serves as a type of Christ, pointing forward to the Savior who would fulfill and surpass the roles of priest and king. His life and actions foreshadowed the coming of the Messiah, whose eternal priesthood and universal blessing would provide peace and salvation to all who believe. The mysterious and symbolic nature of Melchizedek's character continues to deepen the Christian understanding of Christ, as the fulfillment of all promises made long before his earthly ministry began. The concept of Melchizedek's eternal priesthood holds profound significance in Christian theology, particularly in relation to the person and work of Jesus Christ. The eternal nature of Melchizedek's priesthood, as portrayed in the book of Hebrews, offers a deep insight into the permanence and completeness of Christ's role as the high priest. This eternal priesthood underscores the foundational truth that salvation is not temporary or conditional but everlasting and secure for all who believe. Melchizedek's priesthood, as it appears in Genesis, is unique in that it is not tied to any particular lineage or institution. Unlike the Levitical priests, who served in a system defined by birthright and sacrifice, Melchizedek's priesthood appears to transcend time and structure. He is described as having neither beginning nor end, and his priesthood is not bound by genealogy. This mysterious nature of his priesthood set a precedent for the kind of eternal priesthood that Christ would later fulfill. Jesus, as the ultimate priest in the order of Melchizedek, offers an eternal and unbroken intercession for humanity. His sacrifice on the cross, unlike the repeated sacrifices of the Levitical priests, was a once-for-all offering that has eternal significance. It affirms that salvation is not dependent on human effort or the limitations of time but on Christ's eternal work. The eternal nature of the Melchizedek priesthood has important implications for understanding the permanence of salvation. If Christ's priesthood is eternal, then the benefits it offers, atonement, reconciliation, and access to God, are likewise eternal. Jesus, as the eternal high priest, continually intercedes for believers, guaranteeing their place before God. This assurance of eternal salvation is central to Christian faith, offering believers confidence that their redemption is secure, regardless of their shortcomings or the passing of time. The implication is clear. No other priesthood or sacrifice could ever achieve what Christ accomplished. His eternal priesthood ensures that no sin or failure can undo the work he completed on the cross. Moreover, the Melchizedek priesthood affirms Christ's unique role in salvation history. In contrast to the temporary Levitical priesthood, which was part of a system that pointed toward something greater, the Melchizedek priesthood reveals the fullness of God's plan for redemption. Christ, as the perfect high priest, was both the mediator and the sacrifice, offering himself to fulfill the requirements of the law. His eternal priesthood means that he is always present, always interceding, and his sacrifice continues to be effective for all who believe. The eternal nature of Melchizedek's priesthood is not just a theological concept but a comfort and assurance for Christians. It means that the work of salvation, accomplished through Christ's eternal priesthood, is not fleeting. It is secure and will never fade. Just as Melchizedek's priesthood was not bound by time or genealogical limits, so too is Christ's work, bringing eternal peace and salvation to all who are part of his covenant. The offering of bread and wine by Melchizedek in Genesis 14 stands as one of the most intriguing and significant moments in biblical history, not only because of its immediate context, but also because of its profound theological implications for the Christian faith. As the king of Salem and priest of God Most High, Melchizedek's act of bringing out bread and wine to Abraham has long been seen as a foreshadowing of the Eucharist, the sacred meal that Christians observe in remembrance of Jesus Christ. The connection between Melchizedek's offering and the Last Supper is more than a simple parallel. It holds deep layers of meaning that continue to resonate within the Christian tradition. In Genesis 14, Melchizedek's offering is an expression of hospitality, blessing, and divine provision. After Abraham's victory over the kings, Melchizedek presents him with bread and wine, not merely as a gift, but as a symbol of God's sustenance and grace. In a world where offerings to God were often centered around sacrifices of animals, Melchizedek's choice of bread and wine signals a deeper, more mystical communion with the divine. This act of sharing bread and wine with Abraham speaks to the establishment of peace, the nourishing of the Spirit, and the covenantal relationship between God and humanity. For Christians, the symbolism of the bread and wine offered by Melchizedek finds its ultimate fulfillment in the Last Supper, when Jesus Christ, the true high priest in the order of Melchizedek, shares bread and wine with his disciples. During this meal, Jesus redefines the elements, saying, "This is my body, and this is my blood." The bread and wine in the Last Supper, much like Melchizedek's offering, transcend their physical properties to embody something far greater, a divine promise of communion with God through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Just as Melchizedek's offering to Abraham was a symbol of God's blessing, Christ's offering at the Last Supper becomes the ultimate blessing for believers, representing not just physical sustenance but spiritual nourishment for the soul. The Eucharist, or Holy Communion, has been a central practice in Christian worship since the time of Christ. In the bread and wine, Christians believe they partake in the very body and blood of Christ, joining with him in a mystical union that transcends mere ritual. This sacrament signifies the ongoing presence of Christ in the life of the believer, ensuring that his work of salvation continues to be applied to their lives. Through the Eucharist, Christians participate in the eternal priesthood of Christ, the high priest in the order of Melchizedek, who continually offers himself for the reconciliation of humanity with God. Thus, the bread and wine of Melchizedek are more than a historical offering. They point forward to the ultimate act of divine love and sacrifice in the person of Jesus Christ. Just as Melchizedek blessed Abraham with the bread and wine, so too does Christ bless his followers with eternal life through his own body and blood, given freely for the redemption of the world. This sacred exchange continues to unfold in the Eucharist, where believers are invited to remember, participate, and commune with the living Christ. In the early centuries of Christianity, Melchizedek's mysterious figure took on a deep and esoteric significance, particularly within mystical and Gnostic traditions. His priesthood, devoid of clear genealogical roots or earthly lineage, became a symbol of transcendent wisdom and divine knowledge, offering early Christian mystics and thinkers a figure that bridged the gap between the divine and the human. Melchizedek's priesthood, eternal and outside the bounds of time, represented not only a divine appointment, but also a direct connection to the secret knowledge that was central to the Gnostic interpretation of Christian teachings. In Gnostic Christianity, Melchizedek's figure was often seen as a possessor of divine wisdom, an enlightened priest who, much like Christ, offered insights into the hidden, mystical nature of God and creation. Unlike the traditional Levitical priesthood, which was rooted in the physical and earthly lineage of Israel, Melchizedek's priesthood was depicted as eternal, divine, and unbound by the limitations of earthly structures. Early Gnostics viewed him as a divine mediator who imparted secret teachings, not just about sacrifice and atonement, but about the higher realms of spiritual knowledge. His role was not simply to officiate in religious rituals, but to offer the soul a deeper understanding of the divine order and its cosmic principles. In mystical Christianity, Melchizedek's priesthood was similarly interpreted as a model for a higher form of spiritual enlightenment. Mystics saw his eternal priesthood as an archetype of the unchanging, ever-present truth of God. His offering of bread and wine, which foreshadowed the Eucharist, symbolized the divine nourishment of the soul, an eternal feast that transcended earthly existence. As a figure outside the constraints of time, Melchizedek represented the timeless nature of divine wisdom that could guide those seeking a closer connection to the divine. The notion of divine knowledge, a key theme in early Christian mysticism, is deeply intertwined with Melchizedek's character. His lack of a genealogical record was not seen as a mere anomaly, but as a reflection of his connection to the divine source, untainted by human history or the limitations of earthly existence. In a world where knowledge was often hoarded by the elite or reserved for the initiated, Melchizedek represented a priesthood that offered insight freely and without barrier, a path for those seeking true spiritual enlightenment. As the early church struggled to define its identity amidst a sea of competing ideas, the figure of Melchizedek served as a symbol of the higher, transcendent knowledge that believers could access through Christ. For the Gnostics, his priesthood was a precursor to the ultimate revelation of divine truth found in Christ, who was seen as the embodiment of all the wisdom and knowledge that Melchizedek had only foreshadowed. Thus, Melchizedek became an integral figure in the spiritual landscape of early Christian mysticism, representing the bridge between the hidden, divine wisdom of the past and the unfolding revelation of the gospel. As the centuries unfolded, Melchizedek's enigmatic presence evolved within various esoteric traditions, where he came to symbolize not just a priesthood, but an embodiment of hidden knowledge and divine wisdom. His mysterious origins, unbound by genealogical ties and veiled in biblical silence, offered an ideal figure for those seeking deeper spiritual truths, transcending conventional religious structures. Melchizedek's role as a priest of the Most High God was not merely a historical position. It became a living symbol of access to cosmic eternal truths that lay beyond the grasp of the average believer. For many mystics and esoteric thinkers, his priesthood represented a gateway to a higher understanding of the universe, a path to the divine that was both hidden and exclusive. In these circles, Melchizedek was not merely a shadowy figure from the past, but a symbol of a profound connection to the divine order that governs the cosmos. The idea of a priesthood, untethered by lineage or time, intrigued those who sought a deeper, more universal truth. They saw in Melchizedek's role an illustration of how divinity could manifest without earthly boundaries, offering access to wisdom that was above human comprehension. His priesthood was understood as eternal, timeless, and transcendent, a beacon for those who sought spiritual awakening beyond the confines of conventional religion. The very absence of his genealogy became a statement about the purity and transcendent nature of divine wisdom, suggesting that the true path to spiritual understanding could not be rooted in human history but was, instead, a timeless and universal truth accessible only to those who had the eyes to see. Esoteric thinkers often connected Melchizedek to the concept of a primordial and universal order, one that exists beyond the physical world. In his mysterious role, he served as a bridge between heaven and earth, a mediator between the divine and human realms. His position as a high priest was seen not only as a function of sacred service but as a representation of the natural order of the universe, a deep cosmic law that underlies all creation. To understand Melchizedek was to understand the fabric of reality itself, the way that divine law governs all things from the smallest particle to the grandest celestial body. For those involved in mystical practices, the figure of Melchizedek embodied the ideal of gnosis, the profound, direct knowledge of the divine. His role as a priest was not just to officiate rituals, but to reveal the hidden mysteries of the universe, offering insight into the divine design. He became a symbol of the eternal wisdom that transcends the physical world and the limitations of human understanding. In this light, Melchizedek represented not just an ancient figure, but a timeless archetype of the divine wisdom that connects all things, a beacon for those seeking the ultimate truth that lies beyond the visible world. His story, veiled and enigmatic, has continued to captivate esoteric traditions, where his name evokes not only reverence but a deeper understanding of the hidden forces at play in the universe. For those who dare to search beyond the surface, Melchizedek represents a pathway to discovering the universal truths that govern existence, an eternal priesthood that transcends the earthly world and reveals the divine order that underpins all creation. Melchizedek's enigmatic role in the Bible has captured the attention of occult traditions for centuries, where he has often been adopted as a symbol of hidden divine knowledge and ancient rites. In these esoteric circles, he is not simply a biblical figure but a mystical archetype, embodying the path to secret wisdom that transcends the limitations of the ordinary world. His mysterious appearance in the book of Genesis, unbound by any clear genealogy or historical lineage, makes him the perfect figure for those seeking to explore deeper, hidden dimensions of spiritual understanding. As the high priest of the Most High God, Melchizedek is seen as a guardian of secret knowledge, a keeper of ancient wisdom that is reserved for those initiated into the hidden mysteries of the universe. In occult traditions, Melchizedek is often associated with the transmission of esoteric teachings, those ancient secrets that offer a deeper understanding of the divine order. He is portrayed as a figure who has access to the knowledge of the cosmos, one who serves as a bridge between the human and the divine realms. His priesthood, devoid of earthly ties, becomes a powerful symbol of spiritual liberation, offering access to a wisdom that is not bound by the constraints of time or human history. This timeless, transcendent quality makes him a central figure in occult thought, where he is revered not just as a priest but as a spiritual guide who leads initiates toward the understanding of universal truths. The connection between Melchizedek and occult teachings often lies in his association with sacred rituals and ancient rites. In some traditions, he is considered the originator of secret rites of passage, ceremonies that mark the transition from ignorance to enlightenment. These rites, often shrouded in mystery, are thought to be the means through which the seeker is introduced to the hidden knowledge that Melchizedek embodies. Through these rituals, initiates are believed to gain access to spiritual realms that are otherwise inaccessible, guided by the wisdom that Melchizedek, as a high priest, imparts. His connection to such rites further elevates his significance in occult traditions, positioning him as not just a historical figure but as the eternal keeper of sacred knowledge. In addition to his association with rituals, Melchizedek's character in the occult is often linked to the pursuit of immortality and divine transformation. His priesthood, eternal and unbroken, serves as a metaphor for the transformation of the soul, guiding seekers toward the realization of their divine potential. Just as Melchizedek remains an eternal priest, so too are the aspirants in occult practices believed to transcend earthly limitations and ascend toward higher spiritual realms. This concept of spiritual immortality, achieved through the pursuit of hidden knowledge and divine wisdom, makes Melchizedek a powerful symbol for those in the occult world seeking to unlock the deeper mysteries of life and existence. Through the lens of occult thought, Melchizedek's character represents not just an ancient priesthood but a living tradition of spiritual awakening, a path that leads beyond the confines of ordinary understanding into the realm of the divine. His teachings, both symbolically and literally, offer the seeker a glimpse into the hidden structure of the cosmos, offering insights that, according to these traditions, can transform the soul and elevate the spirit to its highest potential. Melchizedek's enigmatic priesthood has often been compared to the priesthoods of ancient mystery religions, with striking parallels that suggest a deeper connection between the two. In these ancient religions, priests were believed to hold secret knowledge and divine power, acting as intermediaries between the gods and the people. Similarly, Melchizedek, as the high priest of the Most High God, occupies a unique position in biblical tradition that mirrors these ancient religious systems. His role as both king and priest, his offering of bread and wine, and his absence of genealogical ties align with the structures of mystery cults, where the priest was seen as a figure who could transcend earthly limitations and access the divine. One of the central themes in mystery religions is the idea of hidden knowledge wisdom that is reserved for the initiated few, accessible only through a series of sacred rites and ceremonies. Melchizedek embodies this theme in his own priesthood, as he offers a blessing to Abraham that carries profound spiritual significance. In the mystery religions, such rituals were believed to unlock cosmic secrets, providing the initiate with access to divine wisdom that could lead to personal transformation and spiritual enlightenment. In much the same way, Melchizedek's encounter with Abraham can be seen as a symbolic ritual, one that connects the earthly realm with the divine and imparts knowledge that transcends human understanding. The worship of gods in ancient mystery religions often involve the veneration of figures who were thought to embody divine order and wisdom. These figures were not merely gods in the traditional sense, but personifications of cosmic principles, such as justice, wisdom, and life. Melchizedek, in his role as priest of the Most High God, can be seen as embodying similar cosmic principles. His priesthood is not bound by the ordinary constraints of time or earthly heritage, but instead stands as an eternal symbol of divine authority and wisdom. His offering of bread and wine further connects him to ancient rituals that sought to nourish the soul and connect the worshipper with the divine. Just as the gods in these ancient traditions were often believed to bestow divine nourishment, Melchizedek's ritual provides a glimpse into a higher spiritual reality, where the material and the divine coexist in harmony. Additionally, the idea of a cosmic order governed by higher spiritual beings is central to many mystery religions, and it echoes the role that Melchizedek plays in the biblical narrative. As a priest who serves the Most High God, he is seen as an agent of divine order, functioning not only as a spiritual leader, but also as a representative of the divine will. This mirrors the roles of priests in ancient mystery religions, who were seen as channels through which the divine could communicate with the world, bringing hidden knowledge and guiding individuals toward a deeper understanding of the cosmos. The rituals associated with these mystery religions, often involving sacred symbols and divine revelations, resonate with Melchizedek's priestly role, highlighting the ways in which spiritual wisdom and cosmic order were transmitted through sacred acts. In this light, Melchizedek's priesthood becomes a link between the ancient mystery religions and the biblical tradition, offering a powerful image of divine knowledge, spiritual transformation, and cosmic order. His role as king and priest not only reflects the divine, but also represents the quest for hidden wisdom, one that transcends time and connects the material world with higher spiritual realms. The search for Melchizedek in modern biblical scholarship has become a fascinating journey that touches on the intersection of history, theology, and mysticism. While he is a relatively obscure figure in the Bible, his role as a priest and king has sparked intense interest, leading scholars to explore his identity and origins from various angles. For centuries, his mysterious appearance in Genesis and Psalms, as well as his absence of genealogical records, has posed questions that demand answers, inviting new theories and interpretations that seek to understand who he truly was. One of the primary aspects that modern scholars focus on is Melchizedek's enigmatic priesthood. In the context of the ancient Near East, priesthoods were often tied to family lineages, with priestly authority passed down through generations. However, Melchizedek's lack of a known lineage stands in stark contrast to the expectations of his time. This absence of genealogical reference has led to a number of theories regarding his origins, with some scholars suggesting that he was a figure who existed outside the traditional confines of Israel's religious structure. Some have proposed that he could have been a Canaanite priest-king who was elevated by the biblical narrative to fulfill a divine purpose, while others speculate that he may have been a pre-Israelite figure who represented a universal priesthood, transcending the confines of any one culture or religion. Other theories suggest that Melchizedek might have been a manifestation of a divine being or a celestial figure, linked to the ancient concept of divine intermediaries who served as messengers between humanity and God. His priesthood, in this view, becomes less about lineage and more about an eternal role, one that connects the divine and human realms. Scholars who subscribe to this interpretation often point to the connections between Melchizedek's priesthood and that of Jesus Christ, suggesting that both figures represent a unique and eternal priestly order that stands apart from the Levitical priesthood of Israel. Additionally, some scholars have delved into the possibility that Melchizedek's name and titles carry deeper symbolic meanings that shed light on his identity. The name Melchizedek, meaning King of Righteousness, and his title as the King of Salem, or King of Peace, are often seen as reflections of divine qualities rather than simple geographic or political titles. These names are frequently interpreted as symbolic of a broader theological reality, where Melchizedek represents the cosmic principles of justice and peace that are central to the divine order. In modern Christian thought, the identity of Melchizedek is often explored in connection with the person of Jesus Christ. Many theologians interpret Melchizedek's priesthood as a foreshadowing of Christ's eternal priesthood, drawing parallels between the two figures and suggesting that Jesus, in the order of Melchizedek, fulfills the role of a high priest who transcends human limitations. This connection elevates Melchizedek from a mere historical figure to a theological archetype, linking him to Christian notions of redemption, sacrifice, and eternal life. The modern search for Melchizedek, therefore, continues to inspire both scholarly investigation and spiritual reflection. His elusive identity and his priestly role open doors to deeper questions about divine wisdom, the nature of priesthood, and the eternal connection between God and humanity. Melchizedek's influence has transcended the pages of ancient texts, emerging as a captivating figure in modern literature, films, and media. His enigmatic role as a priest and king, with an untraceable lineage and mysterious origins, has made him a natural fit for stories involving mystery, power, and the supernatural. In many ways, Melchizedek embodies the allure of the unknown, an ancient figure whose significance reaches far beyond his brief biblical appearance, making him a symbol of hidden wisdom and cosmic justice. In literature, Melchizedek often appears as a symbol of divine power and spiritual enlightenment. His mysterious nature serves as an invitation to explore the esoteric, with authors frequently drawing on his timeless and otherworldly qualities. His character is often portrayed as an archetype of divine intervention, a figure who bridges the gap between the human and divine realms, offering knowledge and guidance to those who seek it. In books that explore themes of hidden knowledge and occult wisdom, Melchizedek is sometimes introduced as a secret keeper or a guardian of cosmic truths, reflecting his biblical role as one who holds power without revealing its full nature. Films and television shows have also embraced Melchizedek's mysterious persona, weaving him into plots that revolve around power, spiritual awakening, and ancient secrets. In these narratives, he is often depicted as a sage-like figure who possesses knowledge of both the material and spiritual worlds. His connection to ancient rites and divine authority makes him a compelling figure for stories about religious intrigue, secret societies, and conspiracies. These modern adaptations frequently emphasize the symbolism of Melchizedek's priesthood, positioning him as a key player in struggles for control over knowledge and power, much like the mystery surrounding him in ancient texts. Melchizedek's influence extends beyond religious or historical contexts and into the realm of contemporary stories about mystery and the quest for ultimate truth. His association with cosmic order, eternal priesthood, and universal blessing resonates in a world increasingly fascinated by hidden knowledge and spiritual enlightenment. Films and books about secret societies or apocalyptic scenarios often use his image to signify a deeper truth waiting to be uncovered. Whether through the lens of modern myth-making or spiritual narratives, Melchizedek represents the timeless search for meaning, power, and connection to the divine. His appearance in popular culture reflects the ongoing human fascination with the intersection of the divine and the earthly. As a figure who transcends ordinary limits and represents both the sacred and the mysterious, Melchizedek offers a window into the human desire for deeper understanding and access to higher realms of consciousness. In a world where the search for meaning often intertwines with questions about divine purpose, Melchizedek remains a powerful symbol, shaping contemporary stories about the unknown and the eternal forces at work in the universe. Melchizedek has become an intriguing and significant figure in New Age spirituality, often regarded as a symbol of divine consciousness, healing, and spiritual evolution. In this context, his presence is not confined to his biblical roots but has expanded into a broader, more mystical interpretation that aligns with the New Age pursuit of self-awareness, enlightenment, and higher understanding. Within this movement, Melchizedek represents an archetype of spiritual mastery, embodying wisdom that transcends traditional religious frameworks. In New Age teachings, Melchizedek is frequently associated with healing, not only on a physical level but also in terms of emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. His priesthood is often seen as a pathway to healing, with practitioners believing that connecting with his energy or invoking his name can bring about transformation and personal growth. This connection is seen as an invitation to access higher planes of consciousness, a step toward aligning oneself with universal truths. Melchizedek is viewed as a guide, a being whose wisdom can help individuals navigate their personal journeys, offering insight into the workings of the cosmos and the divine forces that govern it. Spiritual growth is another central theme in the New Age understanding of Melchizedek. His role as a high priest, bridging the earthly and divine, is seen as symbolic of the process of personal ascension moving from the material world toward spiritual enlightenment. Many practitioners in the New Age movement believe that by tapping into the energies of Melchizedek, they can access higher realms of consciousness and gain a deeper understanding of the universe's mysteries. His association with eternal life and divine order positions him as a beacon for those seeking to align their personal energies with universal harmony, often through meditation, visualization, and other spiritual practices. In some New Age circles, Melchizedek is even described as a being of light or an ascended master, a figure who has transcended the limitations of the physical realm and now exists as a guiding force in spiritual realms. His priesthood is seen as a model for the ideal spiritual path, one that is not bound by time or tradition but is rooted in timeless wisdom and universal love. The idea that he is an eternal being, without beginning or end, resonates with New Age beliefs in the cyclical nature of existence and the eternal nature of the soul. His connection to divine consciousness in New Age thought is deeply tied to the understanding that all humans have the potential to awaken to their own divine nature. Melchizedek's role, as it is interpreted in this context, is to help facilitate this awakening, offering guidance toward personal empowerment, enlightenment, and inner peace. His figure represents the ultimate spiritual mentor, one who can lead individuals to a deeper connection with their true selves and the universal consciousness that binds all existence together. In this way, Melchizedek continues to inspire seekers of truth and spiritual wisdom in the modern world, standing as a timeless symbol of the quest for inner transformation and divine understanding. In recent years, Melchizedek has found a place in various theories surrounding the concept of the New World Order, NWO, often depicted as a spiritual figure whose influence transcends the traditional boundaries of religious doctrine. His association with the NWO is not rooted in historical fact or mainstream interpretations, but instead stems from a mixture of esoteric beliefs, spiritual speculation, and modern conspiracy theories. These theories often portray Melchizedek as a central figure in the spiritual awakening of humanity, one who will guide the world through a time of transition toward a new, enlightened global order. Proponents of this view suggest that Melchizedek's priesthood, which is linked to the eternal, divine order, serves as a metaphor for the hidden knowledge and wisdom that will be revealed in the so-called New Age. According to these theories, Melchizedek represents a higher level of spiritual awakening that humanity must reach to overcome the chaos and division seen in the modern world. His priesthood, which exists outside the confines of traditional religious structures, is seen as a blueprint for a new form of global governance, one based on universal spiritual truths and esoteric knowledge rather than political power or material wealth. In these conspiracy theories, Melchizedek is often linked with the idea of a secret society or a group of enlightened individuals who hold the keys to the future of humanity. This group is believed to be working behind the scenes to guide the world toward a spiritual awakening, with Melchizedek positioned as their spiritual leader or symbol of divine authority. These interpretations usually emphasize Melchizedek's role as a figure who transcends time and space, making him an ideal symbol for the mysterious and often secretive forces that are believed to shape world events in the shadows. His connection to the divine order makes him a powerful figure in the narrative of spiritual transformation, with many seeing his return as necessary for the world to achieve true enlightenment and unity. The symbolism of Melchizedek in modern conspiracy theories often reflects a desire for a new kind of world order, one that is not based on traditional political or social structures but on a deeper, spiritual understanding. For many, his association with the NWO signifies hope for a future in which humanity can break free from the limitations of earthly divisions, whether they be political, religious, or economic. The Melchizedekian vision offers a path to spiritual redemption, where individuals and nations alike are guided by higher knowledge and universal love. While the link between Melchizedek and the New World Order is largely speculative, it taps into a deep yearning for transformation and unity in the modern world. His presence in these theories speaks to the ongoing human quest for spiritual truth and the search for a path forward in times of uncertainty and change. Whether seen as a symbol of spiritual leadership or a literal figure who will return to lead humanity, Melchizedek's role in these narratives continues to provoke thought and inspire those seeking answers to the profound questions of existence and purpose. Melchizedek's legacy transcends the boundaries of a single faith, finding recognition across various world religions. His enigmatic life and priesthood, though primarily rooted in the Bible, have sparked interest and reverence in many spiritual traditions, each interpreting his role and significance in ways that reflect their unique beliefs and cultural contexts. From Judaism to Christianity, and even in Islam and other mystical traditions, Melchizedek represents a figure of profound spiritual authority, embodying both the mystery of divine knowledge and the promise of transcendence. In Judaism, Melchizedek is recognized as a righteous king and priest who stands outside the traditional Levitical priesthood. His appearance in Genesis 14:18 is brief but impactful, leaving behind a legacy of spiritual purity and divine wisdom. Though later Jewish thought did not elevate him to the level of major prophetic figures like Abraham or Moses, he is still revered as a symbol of moral and spiritual integrity. The Midrash and other Jewish writings contemplate his priesthood as an ideal that bridges the sacred and the earthly realms, uniting the functions of king and priest in a harmonious balance. For Christians, Melchizedek's significance is brought to the forefront in the New Testament, particularly in the book of Hebrews, where his priesthood is described as eternal and superior to the Levitical priesthood. The theological implications of this connection are vast. Melchizedek is seen not only as a precursor to Christ, but as a foreshadowing of the eternal priesthood that Jesus himself embodies. This link enhances the Christian understanding of Jesus as the ultimate high priest, who offers salvation and intercedes between humanity and God. Melchizedek's blessing of Abraham is understood as a precursor to Christ's redemptive act, further cementing his importance in Christian theology. In Islam, Melchizedek is recognized, though he does not play as prominent a role as in Judaism and Christianity. However, Islamic tradition holds him in high regard as a figure of righteousness and a servant of God. Though the Quran does not mention him explicitly, some Islamic scholars view Melchizedek as an example of a pious leader who ruled justly and upheld the divine message. His connection to Abraham is also honored, reinforcing his role as a guide to faith and righteousness. In mystical and esoteric traditions, Melchizedek's influence extends beyond the confines of organized religions. Various schools of thought, from Gnosticism to New Age spirituality, have embraced him as a symbol of hidden knowledge and divine wisdom. His priesthood is often interpreted as representing a higher, universal spiritual order, one that transcends the limitations of earthly institutions and points toward a more profound, cosmic truth. His association with divine power, purity, and eternal wisdom resonates deeply within the esoteric traditions, where he is often regarded as a figure of transformation and illumination. Across all these traditions, the universal appeal of Melchizedek lies in the profound mystery surrounding his life and priesthood. He stands as a beacon of spiritual integrity, embodying the union of the sacred and the earthly. His teachings, though often elusive, continue to inspire seekers of truth, bridging the divine with humanity in ways that resonate with the deepest longings for understanding, peace, and spiritual enlightenment. Melchizedek's priesthood stands as a profound archetype, one that transcends religious boundaries and speaks to the core of spiritual unity. His role as both king and priest, serving as an intermediary between humanity and the divine, offers a model that resonates with a wide array of spiritual paths. In his figure, the roles of temporal power and spiritual leadership are harmoniously united, creating an ideal of balance and wholeness that echoes through various faiths, each seeing in him a reflection of their own spiritual ideals. The significance of Melchizedek's priesthood lies in its universality. Unlike the priesthoods tied to specific bloodlines, such as the Levitical priesthood of Israel, Melchizedek's is not confined to one nation or one tradition. His priesthood is marked by an absence of genealogical ties, which leaves room for broader spiritual interpretation. This absence makes Melchizedek's priesthood symbolic of an archetype, one that can be embraced by different religious and spiritual systems. His ministry is not about lineage or inheritance, but about divine service and righteousness. As a result, his priesthood becomes a universal ideal, one that transcends earthly boundaries and emphasizes the deeper connection between the divine and human beings. This archetypal role is especially evident in the way Melchizedek brings together disparate elements, kingship and priesthood, the sacred and the earthly, into a unified whole. The priesthood he represents is not just about performing rituals, it's about bringing peace, guidance, and balance to the world. In this sense, his role is not limited to any one religious tradition. He embodies the possibility of a priesthood that works for the spiritual well-being of all, without exclusion or division. Across the world's major religions, there is a recognition that the need for spiritual leaders who embody wisdom, integrity, and peace is universal. Melchizedek is that ideal, transcending cultural and doctrinal differences to represent a shared vision of a righteous spiritual leader. In Christianity, Melchizedek's priesthood foreshadows that of Jesus Christ, who, according to the New Testament, is a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. In Judaism, he represents an ideal of priestly purity that stands apart from the Levitical line. Even in Islamic tradition, while not explicitly mentioned, his story is resonant with the values of righteousness and divine service. Beyond these faiths, esoteric and New Age traditions have often adopted his figure as a symbol of hidden wisdom and spiritual enlightenment, further expanding the reach of his priesthood into a broader universal spirituality. Ultimately, Melchizedek's priesthood calls humanity to a higher understanding, a spiritual unity that transcends divisions. His priesthood is not a call to separate people but a unifying force, drawing together the sacred and the mundane, the divine and the human, in a way that transcends the limitations of individual faith traditions. In his life and role, we find not just a religious leader, but a symbol of the potential for peace and spiritual connection that lies at the heart of all spiritual paths. Melchizedek's role in the divine plan is one that stretches across the tapestry of creation, judgment, and restoration, acting as a key figure in God's grand design. His presence, though enigmatic, signifies a deeper purpose that weaves through the history of humanity and the unfolding of divine will. As both king and priest, Melchizedek represents the harmony between the temporal and the eternal, acting as a conduit through which God's purpose for creation is revealed. His priesthood, set apart from all others, aligns with a greater cosmic order that transcends human understanding. In the creation narrative, Melchizedek stands as a figure who embodies the harmony that God intended for the world. His kingdom of Salem, or Jerusalem, becomes a symbol of peace amidst the chaos that follows the fall of man. As a priest of the Most High God, he serves as a reminder that even in a world marred by sin and brokenness, there is a divine order, a blueprint for peace and reconciliation. His very presence on earth, meeting with Abraham, is an act of divine intervention, where heaven touches earth to restore what has been lost. In this way, Melchizedek's role foreshadows the reconciliation of creation, pointing toward the eventual restoration that God intends for the world. Through judgment, Melchizedek's significance deepens. His blessing of Abraham after the Battle of the Kings not only recognizes Abraham's victory but also emphasizes a spiritual authority that transcends earthly powers. In the act of blessing, Melchizedek reaffirms God's sovereignty, highlighting that divine judgment through the restoration of peace and order is always part of God's plan. This judgment is not about destruction, but about bringing balance to a fractured world. Just as the flood of Noah's time was a judgment that allowed for the preservation and purification of creation, Melchizedek's priesthood suggests that judgment and restoration go hand in God's larger plan for the world. Melchizedek also plays a crucial role in pointing forward to the ultimate act of restoration, the coming of the Messiah. His priesthood, eternal and without beginning or end, serves as a direct link to the role that Christ will fulfill in the New Testament. The connection between Melchizedek and Jesus Christ is not coincidental but divinely ordained, with Melchizedek serving as a type of Christ's priesthood, a priesthood that transcends the limitations of time, space, and human understanding. Through Jesus, God's plan for restoration reaches its fullness, and Melchizedek's priesthood points to the greater reality of divine redemption that is achieved through Christ's sacrifice. In this way, Melchizedek is not just an isolated figure but part of a larger cosmic purpose. His role serves as a bridge between the ancient promises made to Abraham and the fulfillment of those promises through Christ. The priesthood of Melchizedek, standing outside of traditional human lineage, reminds us that God's divine plan often works in ways that are unexpected, transcending our human understanding of lineage, time, and space. Through Melchizedek, we glimpse the eternal, unchanging nature of God's will and the ongoing story of creation, judgment, and restoration that will one day culminate in the full redemption of the world. In modern spiritual movements, the figure of Melchizedek continues to resonate with a sense of mystery and divine authority. His priesthood, seemingly eternal and untethered to the constraints of time or traditional religious lineage, has captured the imagination of various groups seeking a deeper connection to spiritual truths. These modern movements, spanning from the esoteric to the more established spiritual communities, claim a direct link to Melchizedek's priesthood, positioning him as a foundational figure in their quest for higher knowledge, spiritual empowerment, and divine understanding. The most notable claim to the Melchizedek priesthood comes from the New Age and esoteric circles, where his influence is often seen as a bridge to an ancient, hidden wisdom. These groups view Melchizedek not as a singular historical figure, but as an archetype for spiritual enlightenment and transcendence. They believe that his priesthood represents an order of divine knowledge that transcends organized religions and connects humanity with the cosmos. In these movements, Melchizedek is seen as a spiritual teacher and guide who provides the keys to unlocking higher realms of consciousness, much like the wisdom sought in ancient mystery schools. Practices tied to these beliefs often include meditation, ritualistic ceremonies, and the invocation of divine energies meant to reconnect individuals with the universal truths that Melchizedek is believed to have embodied. Some modern groups claim a literal lineage from Melchizedek, drawing upon biblical references to his eternal priesthood. These organizations often focus on cultivating spiritual leadership and teachings that they believe are derived directly from the principles established by Melchizedek in ancient times. In these communities, the Melchizedek priesthood is not only a symbolic representation, but an active and living tradition that continues to this day. Through sacred rituals, teachings on divine law, and practices of spiritual healing, these groups claim to carry forward the light of Melchizedek's priesthood, offering guidance and protection to those on a spiritual journey. Rituals associated with Melchizedek's teachings often center around the symbolism of bread and wine, echoing his famous offering to Abraham. These elements, representing spiritual nourishment and divine communion, are used in various forms of meditation and communion practices within these movements. By partaking in these sacred rites, followers believe they are drawing closer to the divine source of wisdom and power that Melchizedek himself embodied. These rituals are often designed to open spiritual channels, allowing participants to access the same divine knowledge and enlightenment that Melchizedek is said to have passed down. In addition to New Age groups, some Christian spiritual communities have also embraced the symbolism of Melchizedek's priesthood, interpreting his eternal role as a precursor to the ministry of Christ. These groups view his priesthood as a model for personal transformation and divine service, using it to inspire teachings about living in alignment with divine purpose and offering oneself in service to others. The universal nature of Melchizedek's priesthood, transcending human limitations and boundaries, is seen as an example for individuals to emulate in their own spiritual lives. Whether through meditation, rituals, or teachings, the enduring influence of Melchizedek's priesthood continues to shape modern spiritual movements, providing a connection to a deeper, more mystical understanding of the divine. The idea of Christ as the universal priest finds a profound resonance in the figure of Melchizedek. Both figures stand as embodiments of a priesthood that transcends temporal limitations, establishing a bridge between heaven and earth, humanity and divinity. Christ, in many theological traditions, is seen not only as a priest in the line of Melchizedek but as the fulfillment of that priesthood, bringing to fruition its eternal and universal aspects. Melchizedek's priesthood is characterized by its independence from the conventional systems of the world, existing outside the boundaries of genealogy, time, and human structures. It is this very timelessness that aligns with the cosmic nature of Christ, whose priesthood is rooted in divine, eternal order rather than the limitations of human lineage or institution. When considering the universal Christ in connection to Melchizedek, it becomes evident that both represent a deeper spiritual truth, one that cannot be confined by tradition or earthly limitations. While Melchizedek appears as a king-priest who blesses Abraham and offers him bread and wine, symbols that prefigure the Eucharist, Christ, too, embodies the priestly roles of sacrifice and communion. Christ's universal priesthood encompasses the entire cosmos, positioning him as a mediator between God and all creation, just as Melchizedek mediates between the divine and the human in his encounter with Abraham. Through the sacrifice of Christ, his priesthood takes on a cosmic dimension, uniting all things under God's plan for restoration. The link between Melchizedek and the cosmic Christ also unfolds in the notion of reconciliation. Melchizedek's spiritual message, as reflected in his offering of bread and wine, symbolizes the nourishment of the soul, drawing individuals into a relationship with the divine. Christ, in this role, becomes the fulfillment of this offering. His body and blood, broken and poured out for the world, offer the ultimate communion with God. Just as Melchizedek's priesthood brings blessing and peace, so too does Christ's priesthood usher in a new order of peace, one that is not limited to Israel but is extended to the whole world. Christ, as the universal priest, carries the message of Melchizedek's role forward into the spiritual realm, offering a priesthood that is eternal, cosmic, and encompassing of all creation. It is a priesthood rooted in love, grace, and the restoration of divine order, manifesting through Christ's life, death, and resurrection. As the universal Christ, Christ does not just represent a personal relationship with God but a collective one, a reconnection of all creation to its divine purpose. In this sense, Christ is the fulfillment of Melchizedek's archetype, drawing all into the sacred harmony of the divine plan, where peace and reconciliation reign supreme. The teachings of Melchizedek have inspired a profound journey of personal transformation and spiritual awakening throughout history. His priesthood, transcending earthly structures and limitations, offers a model for spiritual maturity that is both timeless and universal. Melchizedek's role as the eternal priest, not bound by genealogy or tradition, invites individuals to look beyond the conventional frameworks of spirituality and embrace a deeper, more direct connection with the divine. His presence serves as a reminder that true spiritual growth is rooted not in the systems of the world but in a direct relationship with the source of all life. Melchizedek's blessing of Abraham, his offering of bread and wine, can be seen as a symbol of nourishment for the soul, a ritual of communion that transcends mere physical sustenance. Through this offering, he points to the deeper truths of spiritual nourishment, the grace that sustains the soul, and the peace that comes through a direct encounter with the divine. In this way, Melchizedek's priesthood is not just about ritual, but about the transformative power of divine presence. It is through his example that individuals are inspired to seek spiritual awakening, not through outward observances alone, but through a continual, internal relationship with the divine that reshapes the heart and mind. This transformation is also reflected in the understanding of spiritual maturity. Melchizedek, as a priest who stands outside of the temporal and the conventional, invites those on the spiritual path to move beyond the limitations of self and ego. His priesthood, eternal and unchanging, suggests that spiritual maturity is not about worldly success or accumulation, but about the internal alignment with the divine order. Spiritual growth, in the context of Melchizedek's eternal priesthood, requires a shift from the transient to the eternal, a movement from seeking external validation to embracing inner peace and divine purpose. The connection between spiritual maturity and Melchizedek's priesthood lies in the way that his eternal role mirrors the soul's journey toward oneness with the divine. Just as Melchizedek's priesthood exists outside time and space, so too does spiritual maturity transcend the confines of worldly achievement. It is a journey that moves deeper into the mystery of God's love, peace, and grace. In embracing Melchizedek's eternal priesthood, individuals can experience spiritual transformation that moves them toward a more profound understanding of who they are in relation to the divine. This process of awakening is not about acquiring knowledge, but about embodying the spiritual truths that have always existed within the soul, truths that align with the eternal and unchanging nature of Melchizedek's priesthood. Through Melchizedek, the soul is reminded that true spiritual transformation comes not from external accomplishments or ritual, but from a deep inward connection with the divine, a connection that, like Melchizedek's priesthood, is eternal, unchanging, and full of divine potential. The name Melchizedek carries deep theological significance, offering insights into his dual role as both king and priest. Derived from Hebrew, the name is typically translated as King of Righteousness, Melech, meaning king, and Tzedek, meaning righteousness, come together to form a title that speaks to both Melchizedek's governance and the righteousness that defines his reign. This title alone places him as a figure who embodies the highest standards of justice and divine order. It emphasizes the idea that his rule is not merely one of temporal authority but of moral and spiritual leadership, where righteousness governs both his actions and the kingdom over which he reigns. The symbolism of Melchizedek's name extends beyond the historical and into the theological realm. In the context of his encounter with Abraham, it becomes clear that Melchizedek's kingship is one that reflects divine righteousness. His authority is not simply earthly, it is a reflection of God's will and purpose. His role as king of Salem further deepens this understanding, as Salem is traditionally identified with peace, suggesting that the kingdom he rules is one of divine peace, righteousness, and peace in harmony. This reinforces the notion that Melchizedek's priesthood is not separate from his kingship, but integrally tied to the values of justice and peace, illustrating a divine model of governance that transcends earthly systems. The duality of his name also highlights the unique blend of priestly and royal duties that Melchizedek fulfills. While kingship often represents power, authority, and governance, priesthood traditionally symbolizes mediation, holiness, and the offering of sacrifices. Melchizedek's name, King of Righteousness, suggests that his priesthood is not separate from his royal function, but that he embodies both roles in a singular, harmonious identity. As both priest and king, he represents the perfect balance of justice and mercy, power and humility. His actions in blessing Abraham and offering bread and wine serve as an embodiment of this perfect balance, where righteousness is not just a legal or abstract concept, but a living, relational reality that invites others into the divine peace that transcends human conflict. In theological terms, Melchizedek's name foreshadows the coming of Christ, the ultimate King of righteousness, who would bring a perfect and eternal righteousness to reign over all creation. Just as Melchizedek's name reflects his unique role in the story of Abraham, so too does it point toward the larger divine narrative of salvation history, where the kingdom of righteousness is fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. The name Melchizedek, then, is not merely a label, but a profound declaration of his identity, an identity that bridges heaven and earth, reflecting God's plan for righteousness, peace, and eternal priesthood. Through this name, the legacy of Melchizedek continues to inspire and point toward the ultimate fulfillment of divine justice in the person of Christ. Melchizedek stands as a remarkable figure, bridging the realms of the divine and human in a way that few others in history have. His role as both king and priest symbolizes a harmonious union between heaven and earth, a mediator who connects the divine with the mortal world. Unlike the typical separation of royal and priestly duties, Melchizedek embodies the idea that these two spheres are not mutually exclusive, but can coexist in perfect balance. As the King of righteousness and priest of the Most High God, he occupies a unique space in religious history, functioning as a living connection between the earthly and the celestial. His encounter with Abraham is one of the most profound expressions of this bridging role. When Melchizedek blesses Abraham, he does not merely offer a gesture of goodwill but imparts divine favor, acknowledging Abraham's victory as part of a larger cosmic plan. The bread and wine he offers are not just provisions for the journey but symbols of peace, sustenance, and divine grace. In this sacred moment, Melchizedek not only blesses Abraham but also reaffirms the bond between God and humanity, reinforcing the idea that divine blessings are accessible to humans through righteous mediation. The lessons learned from Melchizedek's dual role as king and priest are invaluable. First, his example teaches that true leadership is grounded in righteousness, that kingship should not merely be a matter of power and control but should reflect divine justice and peace. As a priest, he demonstrates that the act of mediating between God and humans is not a passive one but an active engagement with divine will. His role invites us to consider how leadership, both spiritual and temporal, should reflect the higher values of justice, mercy, and peace, serving not only the needs of the people but also the greater divine purpose. Furthermore, Melchizedek's position as a bridge points to a deeper theological truth about the nature of mediation itself. In a world divided by sin and strife, the ability to reconcile opposing realms, heaven and earth, divinity and humanity, requires a figure of profound significance. Melchizedek serves as a type of Christ, whose own priesthood in the order of Melchizedek would ultimately provide the ultimate bridge between the divine and the human. Christ's sacrifice on the cross, like Melchizedek's offerings of bread and wine, would reconcile the two realms, making possible the restoration of peace and justice for all of creation. In the figure of Melchizedek, we see a model of spiritual leadership that calls us to live between these realms, reflecting divine justice in our actions, offering peace to others, and always striving to bridge the gap between the sacred and the ordinary. His life, though mysterious and brief in the biblical narrative, serves as a profound reminder that our own lives, too, can serve as bridges connecting heaven to earth, God's will to our own actions, and peace to a troubled world. Melchizedek, as the king of Salem, is a figure steeped in symbolism, embodying the very essence of peace. His role as a king who governs a city named after peace, Jerusalem, reflects a deeper divine truth that peace is not merely the absence of conflict, but the presence of divine order and reconciliation. In his brief appearance in the biblical narrative, Melchizedek serves as a living reminder that true peace is a gift from God, a peace that surpasses mere human understanding and forms the foundation for the restoration of all creation. He is not just a ruler but a symbol of the peace that humanity desperately seeks but can never attain on its own. His blessing of Abraham after the victorious battle against the kings is pivotal. In this encounter, Melchizedek offers not just bread and wine, but peace itself. The bread and wine, elements of sustenance, carry with them deeper theological meanings. Bread represents the essential nourishment of the soul, while wine signifies joy and the fulfillment of God's promises. These offerings, in the context of peace, represent God's intention to reconcile humanity to himself and restore the relationship that had been fractured by sin. Melchizedek, as both king and priest, stands as the mediator, the one who brings God's peace to Abraham, thereby foreshadowing the ultimate reconciliation between God and mankind. The peace Melchizedek represents is not limited to his time or place. His kingship extends beyond mere temporal rule and speaks to a cosmic peace that reaches into the deepest recesses of creation. This peace, symbolized by the city of Salem, transcends the boundaries of geography and politics, pointing to the reign of God's kingdom that stretches throughout the universe. In his priestly role, Melchizedek's peace is also a sacramental peace, one that invites us to partake in a divine reality through offering and worship, bringing humanity into alignment with God's eternal plan. The significance of this vision of peace is profound. Melchizedek's peace is not a temporary or fleeting state but a permanent reality, a divine assurance that through the proper mediation of God's will, peace can be restored to the earth. His role as both priest and king exemplifies the relationship between humanity and God, where peace is found not in human effort or struggle, but in the divine grace that seeks to reconcile and heal. It is this peace, embodied in the life and actions of Melchizedek, that serves as a foreshadowing of Christ's own mission of reconciliation. In this way, Melchizedek's peace becomes a vision for all of humanity, a peace that is offered freely, not through our own striving, but through God's grace. His reign as the King of Peace invites us to look beyond the chaos of the world to the greater peace that is found in Christ, the Prince of Peace, who came to reconcile us fully to God. The legacy of Melchizedek, the king who ruled in peace, challenges us to seek the divine peace that transcends human understanding and bring that peace to the world around us. The eternal nature of Melchizedek's priesthood stands as a profound testament to the unchanging and unfathomable nature of God's divine order. Unlike the priesthoods that were subject to the limitations of time, birth, and death, Melchizedek's priesthood transcends these boundaries, offering a glimpse into the eternal, unbroken relationship between God and His creation. His priesthood is not confined to a single era or event. It represents a continuous, unending role that is rooted in God's cosmic plan for humanity. In this light, Melchizedek becomes more than just a historical figure. He is a symbol of divine order, a bridge between the temporal and the eternal, reflecting a deeper spiritual reality that echoes through all of Scripture. The unending nature of Melchizedek's priesthood is most clearly reflected in the way it points forward to the eternal priesthood of Christ. In the book of Hebrews, the writer emphasizes that Jesus, like Melchizedek, is a priest forever, one who does not serve by the same limitations of the Levitical priesthood, which was subject to death and succession. Melchizedek's priesthood is not simply a shadow of what is to come, but a direct connection to the eternal priesthood of Christ, where there is no interruption, no end, but a continual mediation of grace and salvation for all who would seek it. This eternal priesthood also speaks to God's unchanging nature in the grand narrative of salvation. In a world that is constantly shifting and marked by the temporality of human life, the priesthood of Melchizedek offers a stable, unwavering foundation. His eternal role symbolizes the constancy of God's grace, which does not change, even in the midst of human failure and sin. Through Melchizedek, we are reminded that God's salvation plan is not bound by human limitations. It is a divine act that is both timeless and expansive. This eternal priesthood ensures that, even in the face of history's greatest calamities, God remains ever present, forever faithful, and always working toward the restoration of His creation. Furthermore, the significance of this unending priesthood in the grand narrative of salvation is profound. It underscores the idea that salvation is not merely a momentary event, but an ongoing process in which God continually offers His presence to humanity. Melchizedek's eternal priesthood invites believers into an ongoing relationship with God, one that is not dependent on the impermanence of earthly structures but grounded in the eternal nature of God's redemptive plan. This priesthood, as it points to the coming of Christ, assures us that salvation is always accessible, always in motion, and always working toward the final fulfillment of God's kingdom. In Melchizedek's eternal priesthood, we find both the mystery and the hope of God's divine order, a hope that points beyond the present, beyond the limitations of time, to a future where God's grace and love reign unbroken and eternal. It reminds us that, no matter how uncertain the world may seem, the foundation of salvation remains unshaken. Melchizedek's role in cosmic harmony and divine order is integral to understanding the balance that exists between the spiritual and physical realms. His priesthood, unbroken and eternal, transcends the natural boundaries of time and place, acting as a conduit between God and His creation. As both king and priest, He represents the ideal balance of authority and service, exemplifying the divine order that sustains both heaven and earth. In His singular person, Melchizedek holds the power of mediation, standing between the sacred and the profane, the heavenly and the earthly. His priesthood is not only a reflection of spiritual unity, but also a model for how harmony is to be achieved between all aspects of existence. In a world marked by disorder, conflict, and decay, Melchizedek's role as a priest of God Most High offers a glimpse into a realm where balance reigns. He is the King of Salem, the city that is known as a place of peace, embodying the divine desire for reconciliation and harmony. Through his offerings and blessings, he draws together both the physical world and the spiritual, showing that the two are not separate or opposed, but are meant to work in harmony. His offering of bread and wine to Abraham, symbols of sustenance and sacrifice, further highlights this connection, demonstrating how the physical elements can be sanctified and used for divine purposes. Melchizedek's actions call us to recognize that true peace can only be found when the spiritual and physical realms are aligned with God's will. This theme of cosmic harmony is deeply rooted in the larger biblical narrative. From the very beginning of creation, God spoke the universe into being, and with each act of creation, there was balance and order. The fall of humanity disrupted this balance, introducing chaos, sin, and separation. Melchizedek, however, represents a return to that divine order, showing that through the priesthood, peace can be restored. In his role, he not only mediates between humanity and God but also embodies the healing of the fracture that occurred in Eden. His priesthood is a reminder that, in the grand scheme of God's cosmic plan, all things are meant to work together in harmony, with each part of creation fulfilling its intended purpose. The importance of balance in the spiritual and physical realms is perhaps most evident in how Melchizedek's priesthood anticipates the coming of Christ. Like Melchizedek, Christ offers a way to reconcile humanity with God, restoring the balance that was lost. Through his sacrifice, he brings peace to both the physical world and the spiritual, reconciling all things to himself. Melchizedek, in this sense, is not just a figure of ancient history, but a living symbol of divine harmony, a beacon for all who seek to understand how the physical and spiritual can coexist in balance. His role reminds us that peace, both within ourselves and in the world, can only come when we align our lives with the divine order that God has set in place. Melchizedek's timeless message continues to reverberate through the corridors of religious thought, leaving an indelible impact on how we understand divine order, peace, and eternal spiritual principles. His mysterious appearance in the Bible, along with his unique role as both king and priest, invites reflection on the nature of God's order and how that order is meant to govern not just the spiritual world but also the physical realm. His priesthood, unending and eternal, transcends the limitations of time and space, becoming a symbol of how divine principles are meant to remain constant and unshaken, regardless of the shifting tides of human history. The lasting impact of Melchizedek's priesthood is felt in the way it shaped the theological understanding of priesthood and mediation between God and humanity. By serving as a priest of God Most High and offering blessings and sustenance to Abraham, Melchizedek represents the divine desire for reconciliation. His role as mediator, not through genealogical lineage or a specific religious system, shows that God's work is not confined to the boundaries we often create, but is instead a universal and unchanging force. This stands as a reminder that God is not bound by time or tradition but remains the eternal source of peace, justice, and order. Melchizedek's priesthood, therefore, teaches that true spiritual authority comes not from human systems, but from direct alignment with the divine will. At the heart of his message is the call to embrace divine order. In a world that is often chaotic and fractured, Melchizedek stands as a symbol of peace, the King of Salem, where peace and harmony reign. His very title of King of Peace suggests that spiritual balance and reconciliation are the foundations of God's kingdom, and it is through peace that divine order is established. This peace is not simply the absence of conflict but the presence of God's perfect will, where all things are restored to their rightful place. Melchizedek's offering of bread and wine to Abraham reinforces this message, symbolizing not just physical nourishment but also the spiritual sustenance that flows from God, bringing healing and wholeness to the soul. The eternal principles that Melchizedek embodies are those of unity, reconciliation, and spiritual maturity. His priesthood points to the eternal nature of God's plan for creation, one that is not subject to the limitations of time or human understanding. By understanding Melchizedek's message, we are invited into a deeper awareness of the spiritual principles that govern the universe. His life and role serve as an example of how we, too, are called to live in alignment with divine order, bringing peace into the world around us, reconciling broken relationships, and seeking to fulfill our purpose within the grand tapestry of creation. Melchizedek's message, though ancient, remains as relevant today as ever, calling us to recognize that true spiritual peace and divine order are not just aspirations, but realities we are invited to participate in. Through his priesthood, we are reminded that God's plan for the world, and for each of us, is one of wholeness, peace, and eternal harmony. The encounter between Melchizedek and Abraham stands as one of the most profound moments in biblical history, carrying a legacy that echoes through centuries of theological and spiritual thought. Their meeting is not just a brief interaction between two individuals, but a pivotal moment that shaped the course of future divine covenants and offered a deeper understanding of the relationship between humanity and God. When Melchizedek, the king and priest of Salem, blessed Abraham after his victory over the kings, it was more than a simple exchange. It was a moment that reverberated through the spiritual fabric of time, setting the stage for the unfolding of God's plan for his people. In offering Abraham bread and wine, Melchizedek symbolized the provision and sustenance of God, giving Abraham not just material nourishment but a deeper spiritual blessing. This act foreshadowed the ultimate provision of God in the form of Jesus Christ, who would, centuries later, offer his body and blood as the bread and wine of the new covenant. Through this encounter, the seeds of the Eucharist were sown, and Melchizedek's offering became an eternal symbol of God's sustenance for his people. It wasn't just a priestly act. It was a demonstration of God's unchanging nature, offering peace and reconciliation to humanity through a figure who transcended time and religious systems. The theological legacy of this encounter is profound. Melchizedek's priesthood, which was not based on genealogy or human appointment, represents a divine order that transcends earthly systems. His priesthood foreshadows the eternal priesthood of Jesus Christ, who, as the book of Hebrews makes clear, is a priest in the order of Melchizedek. In blessing Abraham, Melchizedek affirmed the promise that God would make Abraham the father of many nations, a promise that would later become the foundation of God's covenant with Israel. This act of blessing also marked Abraham as one who was set apart, chosen by God to be a conduit of divine blessing to the nations of the earth. This interaction set the stage for the unfolding of divine covenants in the Old and New Testaments. The covenant God made with Abraham, signified by Melchizedek's blessing, was not just for Abraham and his descendants, but was a covenant of blessing for all nations. Through this connection, we see how God's plan was always meant to be universal, extending beyond the borders of Israel to include the Gentiles. Melchizedek's presence in this moment solidified the truth that God's will was not confined to any one people or time, but was always meant to be a blessing for the entire world. The legacy of this encounter, then, is not just in the priestly order of Melchizedek, but in the covenantal promise that it set into motion. Abraham's faith, acknowledged by Melchizedek, would become the model for the faith of future generations, including those who would be grafted into the covenant through Christ. Their meeting, though brief, serves as a powerful reminder of God's eternal faithfulness and his desire to bless humanity, a legacy that continues to shape our understanding of divine grace and the eternal nature of God's promises. Melchizedek's influence on Christian theology cannot be overstated, as his role as both king and priest serves as a profound foreshadowing of the person and work of Jesus Christ. Throughout the New Testament, especially in the book of Hebrews, the priesthood of Melchizedek is presented as a foundational model for understanding Jesus as the eternal high priest. The way Melchizedek appears in the narrative is both mysterious and purposeful, revealing divine truths that will later find their fullest expression in the person of Christ. His priesthood, which is not bound by genealogy, time, or earthly institutions, becomes the archetype for the eternal priesthood of Jesus, emphasizing that the mediation between God and humanity is not merely a temporal function but part of a divine, eternal plan. In the book of Hebrews, Melchizedek is described as one who was without father or mother, without genealogy, and whose priesthood continues forever. This unique characteristic marks Melchizedek as more than just an earthly figure. He represents a heavenly reality, a priesthood that transcends the limitations of time and place. Jesus, in his role as the eternal high priest, embodies the same eternal and unchanging nature that Melchizedek exemplified. Just as Melchizedek blessed Abraham with bread and wine, offering peace and divine sustenance, Jesus too, through the Eucharist, offers his body and blood to humanity, providing a way for eternal peace and reconciliation with God. This parallel not only connects the two figures in their priestly functions but underscores the continuity of God's redemptive plan through the ages. The intertwining of Melchizedek's role and Christ's redemptive mission becomes evident when considering how Jesus fulfills the promises made through Melchizedek. Jesus, as the eternal high priest, offers a perfect and final sacrifice, not repeatedly as the Levitical priests did, but once and for all. His priesthood is rooted in the same eternal and unbroken order as Melchizedek's, indicating that his redemptive mission is both timeless and unchanging. Through this eternal priesthood, Jesus bridges the gap between God and humanity, as Melchizedek once did, but in a far greater and more complete way. While Melchizedek's blessing of Abraham pointed to God's promises to his people, Jesus' priestly sacrifice brings about the fulfillment of those promises, extending them not just to the descendants of Abraham but to all nations, inviting them into the new covenant. In Christian theology, Melchizedek's influence is not merely historical. It carries a theological weight that deepens our understanding of Christ's nature and mission. He represents the eternal, unchanging nature of God's salvation plan, reminding believers that Christ's work as the high priest is not merely an event in history but an ongoing, eternal truth. As Melchizedek's priesthood was marked by peace, righteousness, and divine order, so too is Christ's priesthood marked by these same qualities, bringing peace to a broken world through his sacrifice and intercession. Thus, Melchizedek's role in Christian thought becomes a lens through which believers view the entirety of Christ's redemptive work, timeless, powerful, and ultimately transformative. The identity of Melchizedek has puzzled theologians, scholars, and believers for millennia, and it remains one of the most enigmatic figures in biblical history. The Bible offers little information about his origins, his lineage, or his ultimate fate, which has sparked a variety of interpretations over the centuries. Some suggest that Melchizedek may have been a human king. Others speculate that he was a divine or angelic being, while a few even entertain the possibility that he could have been a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ himself. Each of these theories attempts to shed light on the profound mystery surrounding this mysterious figure, but none have fully unraveled the question of who Melchizedek truly was. One of the most common interpretations is that Melchizedek was a human king of Salem, a title that would align him with other historical figures of the time. However, the absence of any genealogical record or any clear indication of his ancestry raises questions about his true nature. His sudden appearance in Genesis, without explanation or backstory, is as baffling as it is significant. For some, this lack of origin hints at something greater than a mere human being. Perhaps Melchizedek was a supernatural being, a messenger of God sent at a specific moment in history to fulfill a divine purpose. His role as both a king and priest, without the usual constraints of time or genealogy, aligns more closely with the characteristics of a figure who exists beyond earthly limitations. In Christian thought, particularly in the book of Hebrews, some see Melchizedek as a type of Christ, the eternal priest who has no beginning or end. His eternal priesthood, free from the traditional confines of birth and death, mirrors the priesthood of Jesus, who is described as a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. This interpretation has led some to suggest that Melchizedek was not merely human, but a divine figure, perhaps even a pre-incarnate manifestation of Christ himself, appearing in the Old Testament to set the stage for the New Testament fulfillment. However, this remains speculative, as the Bible does not provide enough evidence to confirm this theory conclusively. Another theory posits that Melchizedek may have been an angelic figure, serving as a heavenly representative to bless Abraham. This view finds support in his mysterious appearance and his exalted status as both priest and king, roles typically reserved for beings of divine origin. His blessing of Abraham, which was not a typical human transaction, further deepens the mystery. Angels, after all, are messengers who often carry out divine assignments in the earthly realm, and Melchizedek's role as a priest of the Most High God could align with this angelic task. Yet, even this theory falls short of providing a definitive answer. The unanswered questions surrounding Melchizedek's identity are part of what makes him so captivating. His mystery is not a flaw but a divine design, meant to provoke thought and reflection on the nature of God's order and the complexity of his plan. As such, the mystery of Melchizedek endures, drawing attention and speculation across centuries, with no definitive answer in sight. The figure of Melchizedek serves as a bridge between the known and the unknown, a symbol of something greater than human understanding, an eternal priesthood, a celestial being, or perhaps a glimpse into the very nature of God's work in history. Melchizedek's story holds a unique place in the tapestry of global spirituality, transcending the boundaries of individual faiths and uniting spiritual seekers from all walks of life. His enigmatic figure, embodying both the priestly and kingly roles, speaks to deep universal themes that resonate across cultures and religions. Whether through his symbolic representation of divine order, peace, or an eternal connection to the sacred, Melchizedek's story has inspired and intrigued people throughout history, crossing the lines of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and even various esoteric and mystical traditions. At the heart of his message is the idea of divine order, a cosmic principle that unites the spiritual and material realms. This message is deeply embedded in the spiritual consciousness of many world religions. In Judaism, he appears as a mysterious and exalted figure, a priest of God Most High, who blesses Abraham and represents an ideal of divine justice. Christianity, particularly through the Book of Hebrews, elevates him as a precursor to Christ's eternal priesthood, symbolizing a higher divine order beyond the constraints of time and human lineage. In Islam, some interpretations view Melchizedek as a representation of righteousness, acting as a link between the earthly and the divine. Across these traditions, the figure of Melchizedek stands not just as a singular character in history, but as a reflection of deeper spiritual truths that bind humanity together. His priesthood, which is described as eternal and without genealogy, has captured the imagination of mystics and theologians alike, suggesting a spiritual archetype of an eternal, divinely ordained mediator between God and humankind. In this sense, his legacy is not confined to one particular faith, but reflects a universal human longing for connection with the divine and a deeper understanding of the cosmos. Melchizedek's story also carries a message of peace, which further amplifies its global significance. In an age marked by conflict and division, his role as the King of Salem, or the King of Peace, presents a powerful symbol of unity. His offering of bread and wine to Abraham, in a world often defined by struggles for power, speaks of a higher way, a way that is rooted in reconciliation, harmony, and spiritual nourishment. His very existence challenges spiritual seekers to move beyond the transient and to reach for that which transcends human limitation, eternal truths that govern the universe. The universality of his message, his priesthood, his peace, and his eternal nature extends far beyond religious boundaries. For spiritual seekers worldwide, Melchizedek embodies a cosmic truth that connects all people. His role as both king and priest represents a balance between the sacred and the mundane, suggesting that spirituality is not confined to religious institutions but is a fundamental part of the human experience. Whether as a symbol of divine order, peace, or an eternal connection to the divine, Melchizedek's story has become a beacon for all who seek a deeper, more universal understanding of life's spiritual purpose. Melchizedek's mysterious role has had a profound impact on religious thought and doctrine throughout history. His enigmatic appearance in the Bible, particularly in Genesis 14, presents a figure that is at once puzzling and captivating. As a priest of God Most High, his connection to Abraham set the stage for deeper theological reflections, especially regarding the nature of priesthood and divine favor. Throughout history, scholars and theologians have wrestled with the implications of his brief but significant appearance. His role as a priest, offering blessings and symbolic gifts, has shaped the understanding of what it means to mediate between God and humanity, bridging the gap between the divine and the earthly. His lack of a known lineage or any recorded death has led to centuries of theological debate, speculating about his nature and his timeless significance. Was he a man, a divine being, or something beyond human comprehension? These questions only heightened his mystery, turning him into a figure that transcended the specific confines of biblical texts and entered the realms of esoteric and mystical thought. The impact of Melchizedek on religious doctrine is especially pronounced in the ways he links the Old and New Testaments. His appearance in Genesis stands as an early precursor to the priesthood of Christ, foreshadowing the eternal priesthood that would come with the advent of the Messiah. In Christian thought, this connection is solidified in the New Testament, particularly in the book of Hebrews, where Jesus is described as a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. This makes Melchizedek not just a historical figure, but a theological archetype for the eternal and unbroken connection between God and humanity, represented through Christ's sacrifice and ongoing intercession. His role in the Old Testament narrative hints at a priesthood that is not bound by temporal rules or genealogical constraints, but instead speaks to the eternal nature of God's divine plan for salvation. Melchizedek's mystery also acts as a bridge between the two testaments. In the Old Testament, he appears as a solitary and significant figure, his priesthood unmarked by any of the constraints that would later define the Levitical priesthood. His offering of bread and wine to Abraham, as well as his blessing of the Patriarch, foreshadows the Eucharistic themes that would later become central to Christian theology. In the New Testament, his priesthood is reinterpreted as an eternal one, fulfilled in Christ. The connection between Melchizedek and Jesus reveals a continuity in the divine plan, from the covenant with Abraham to the fulfillment of that promise through Christ. His story thus serves as a key theological bridge that ties together the promises of the Old Testament with their ultimate realization in the New Testament. In revisiting the role of Melchizedek, we see not just a fleeting figure from the past, but a lasting influence on religious history and thought. His priesthood, his mystery, and his connection to Christ continue to shape theological discourse, drawing together ancient and modern perspectives on the nature of divine mediation and the eternal nature of God's plan. Melchizedek stands as the quintessential archetype of divine leadership, embodying qualities that transcend time and culture. His role as both king and priest reveals the profound integration of leadership, peace, and righteousness. As king of Salem, he was not merely a ruler of land, but a sovereign who represented divine order and peace. His very name, Melchizedek, meaning King of Righteousness, signifies the essence of his leadership, a leader who governs not out of self-interest or power, but through a higher moral and spiritual calling. He leads with integrity, embodying righteousness that flows from his connection with the Most High God, and in doing so, he offers a model of leadership that balances authority with spiritual wisdom. In his role as a priest, Melchizedek's leadership extends beyond political or territorial power. His priesthood is not defined by earthly rituals or genealogical inheritance, but by a direct, unbroken communion with God. This sets him apart from the later Levitical priesthood and positions him as a forerunner to the eternal priesthood, one that transcends the limitations of time, lineage, and human frailty. The peace he offers to Abraham after his victory over the kings is more than ceremonial. It is a peace that bridges the human and divine, a peace that restores balance to a world fragmented by conflict. This peace, rooted in divine righteousness, is not merely the absence of war but the active presence of justice, harmony, and truth. Melchizedek's leadership, characterized by peace and righteousness, resonates deeply as a spiritual archetype. His example serves as a beacon for leaders of all kinds, from those in positions of political power to those guiding spiritual communities. The qualities of humility, justice, and wisdom that Melchizedek embodies reflect the ideals that all leadership should aspire to. He leads not by force or coercion but through his alignment with divine purpose, offering a template for how spiritual authority can manifest in the world. His lasting role as a spiritual archetype is evident in the way his figure continues to inspire and guide religious thought. From early Christian theology to contemporary spiritual practices, Melchizedek serves as a model of divine kingship, one that calls for a leadership that is just, merciful, and holy. His priesthood, untainted by human corruption or ambition, represents an ideal that transcends any earthly system of governance. In the complex fabric of spiritual leadership, Melchizedek remains a foundational symbol of what it means to lead with divine wisdom, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to the greater good. His legacy endures as a reminder that true leadership is not found in power or authority alone, but in the humble service to a higher purpose, guided by peace and righteousness. In the ever-evolving landscape of modern spirituality, the figure of Melchizedek continues to offer profound insights and spiritual lessons that resonate deeply with contemporary seekers. His life and teachings, though ancient, hold a timeless quality that speaks to the fundamental human quest for peace, balance, and connection with the divine. In a world that often seems fractured by conflict and disconnection, Melchizedek stands as a symbol of unity, embodying the possibility of bridging the sacred and the secular, the material and the spiritual. His dual role as both king and priest offers a holistic model of leadership that emphasizes integrity, service, and divine alignment over the pursuit of power or personal gain. This lesson is particularly relevant in today's world, where the boundaries between the spiritual and the worldly often become blurred, and true leadership is increasingly rare. The message of Melchizedek is one of balance, balancing the inner and outer realms, balancing the physical with the spiritual. His reign over Salem, known as the City of Peace, offers a potent reminder that true peace is not merely the absence of conflict, but the presence of divine righteousness. In our modern age, where peace can feel fleeting and unattainable, Melchizedek's life teaches that peace is both a personal and collective endeavor. It begins within the individual, in the alignment of one's life with higher principles, and it radiates outward, influencing the world. His role as a priest of God Most High, without the constraints of lineage or temple, speaks to the universality of spiritual practice, suggesting that true communion with the divine is not confined to any specific ritual or tradition, but is available to all who seek it. In today's world, marked by both unprecedented technological advances and an underlying sense of spiritual disconnection, Melchizedek's message holds particular relevance. His priesthood, eternal and unbroken, calls for a spirituality that transcends time, offering a vision of divine service that is rooted in timeless truths rather than transient trends. As many seek deeper meaning in their lives, his life reminds us that spiritual fulfillment comes not through external achievements or possessions, but through inner transformation and alignment with divine purpose. Moreover, his encounter with Abraham, a moment of shared communion and blessing, offers a model of generosity and humility in spiritual leadership. Melchizedek does not seek recognition or glory for himself, but instead offers a blessing, reinforcing the idea that true spiritual power lies in giving rather than taking. This lesson is essential in an age that often prizes individual success over collective well-being, and it calls for a re-evaluation of what it means to be truly successful in spiritual terms. In reflecting on the symbolism of Melchizedek, modern spirituality can find a source of inspiration and guidance. His message of peace, balance, and spiritual service offers a pathway for individuals and communities alike to move toward greater harmony and divine alignment. In a world filled with noise and distraction, the quiet strength of Melchizedek's example offers a timeless invitation to return to the center, to seek peace within, and to live in accordance with higher, eternal truths. The story of Melchizedek, with its enigmatic and profound nature, offers a unique lens through which to explore the intersection of the divine and humanity. As both king and priest, Melchizedek embodies the unity of sacred roles, bridging the gap between heaven and earth. His priesthood, free from the constraints of lineage or temporal authority, signifies a divine connection that transcends human boundaries and religious institutions. This universal priesthood reaches beyond historical context, offering a timeless model for how spirituality can shape human existence. In a world that often struggles to reconcile the material with the spiritual, Melchizedek's example remains a beacon of hope and guidance. His offering of bread and wine to Abraham serves as a symbol of nourishment, both physical and spiritual, offering peace and blessing without expectation of return. This act reflects the divine generosity and selfless service that are central to Melchizedek's priesthood, providing a pattern for how spiritual leaders and seekers alike should interact with the world around them. It is not through dominance or control, but through service, humility, and the ability to bring healing and unity that Melchizedek's priesthood endures as a model. The eternal nature of Melchizedek's priesthood, as described in the biblical text, serves as a continual reminder that divine truths are not bound by time. His priesthood points to something beyond the physical realm, something that exists in the eternal, unchanging essence of God. Just as the priesthood of Melchizedek is said to have no beginning or end, so too does the spiritual path he represents transcend the limitations of earthly time and space. His priesthood does not rely on human constructs but connects directly to the divine, offering a model of pure and unbroken communion with God. For spiritual seekers across all traditions, Melchizedek's example resonates deeply. His role as a mediator between the divine and humanity speaks to the universal longing for connection with the sacred. Whether through meditation, prayer, or acts of service, Melchizedek's priesthood teaches that every soul has the potential to connect with the divine on a deeper level. It encourages those who seek peace, wisdom, and spiritual growth to remember that, like Melchizedek, they too can embody a divine presence in their daily lives. His example is not one of perfection, but of an enduring commitment to the values of peace, righteousness, and service. Ultimately, Melchizedek's priesthood reminds us that the divine and humanity are not separate realms, but interconnected. His life, filled with mystery and grace, points to the possibility that we too can serve as conduits for divine energy, love, and understanding. His timeless example invites us to reflect on our own roles as spiritual beings, encouraging us to bridge the gap between the sacred and the everyday, allowing the divine to manifest in our lives and in the world. The figure of Melchizedek remains one of the most intriguing and enduring mysteries in theological and spiritual thought. His sudden appearance in the Bible, without explanation or background, has captivated the minds of scholars, theologians, and seekers of truth for millennia. Unlike most biblical figures whose narratives are fleshed out with genealogies and family histories, Melchizedek's story stands alone, shrouded in secrecy and grandeur. His brief encounter with Abraham, where he is both king and priest, leaves more questions than answers, and this very ambiguity is part of his lasting appeal. Throughout history, Melchizedek has inspired countless interpretations and speculations, with some viewing him as a direct embodiment of divine wisdom, others as a forerunner of Christ's eternal priesthood, and still others as a cosmic archetype of spiritual leadership. The silence surrounding his origins, his lack of ancestry, his unexplained status leaves space for profound theological reflection. Why, after all, is his priesthood presented as eternal, unbound by time or human lineage? His presence in sacred scripture seems to challenge conventional understanding of divine order, pushing the reader to consider a higher, transcendent level of spiritual reality, one that exists beyond the confines of human history. The mystery of Melchizedek also resonates deeply in the hearts of those who seek to understand the eternal relationship between God and humanity. His priesthood suggests a divine model that is both regal and sacred, intertwining earthly and heavenly authority in a way that eludes the grasp of conventional logic. The symbolism of Melchizedek as both a king and priest opens doors to a deeper understanding of divine authority, showing that true spiritual leadership is rooted not in dominance, but in service, humility, and peace. His role as a mediator between God and man makes him a powerful symbol of the potential for harmony between the divine and the human. Yet, despite the centuries of scholarship, reflection, and mystical interpretation, Melchizedek's full nature remains elusive, his story unfinished. This very mystery is what continues to draw spiritual seekers toward him. The questions he raises about divine authority, the nature of priesthood, and the relationship between humanity and the divine remain at the heart of theological inquiry. His enigmatic figure serves as a bridge between the Old and New Testaments, an eternal reminder of a spiritual path that transcends time and tradition. In every era, Melchizedek's figure serves as a symbol of faith and wonder, inviting reflection on the divine order and the nature of eternal truth. His priesthood, eternal, unchanging, and mysterious, continues to inspire those who look beyond the surface of Scripture, urging them to seek deeper understanding. Through Melchizedek, we are reminded that some truths cannot be fully grasped or explained, but must be felt, lived, and experienced. His mystery is not a barrier but a doorway, leading those who seek to a place where faith and knowledge meet in the ever-unfolding journey of spiritual discovery.